We're now in public session and we're joined today by the Controller and Auditor General Seán McCarthy as a permanent witness to the committee, and he's joined by Maureen Mulligan, Deputy Director of Audit. We've received apologies from Deputy Pat Deering and Alan Kelly. So the next item on the agenda are the minutes of the meeting of the 28th of March agreed and published. That's agreed. Matters arising. There's nothing specific that won't come up in our discussions on our work programme. So items of correspondence. There's not a major list of correspondence today. The first item is 2081 and 2085. They're both category A's for the opening statement from the Secretary-General for the Department of Justice and Equality, and the briefing note from Catherine Smith, Corporate Secretariat, for today's meeting. So we note and publish that. The next item is correspondence B from accounting officers or ministers and follow up to previous PSC meetings. So we held over item number 2073 from Deirdre Keys, Chief Executive of Kildare Wicklow ETB, at our meeting last week. The documentation was dated the 21st of March, to providing a response to information requested by the committee, including notes on independent valuations, meeting of board held in hotels, leasing of property by KWETB that was previously owned by it, and details of rent-free period for Bray Civic Centre. And Dr Keys also refers to a review of all KWETB board leases and the difficulties so far collating that documentation. We noted and published the item the last day, and we agreed that we might hold it over if people want to further consider it. But we've noted it and published it.
Hands up, I asked for it to be, but I haven't actually looked at it.
We can hold it over again. We're happy to do that.
Did we get any further correspondence? We didn't get any.
There's one other item of correspondence, and I think we'll take it now. It's related to this. It's from
I actually meant further correspondence from
the ETB.
From Deirdre Keys.
No.
Is there further information to come to us in relation to those?
We've got to respond. That's up to us when we discuss it the next day, if we have further questions to ask.
Okay.
So we've noted and published it, but we need to discuss it ourselves. So we'll try and make a point of discussing that correspondence, and just make sure members are aware that that'll be back for discussion the next day when the documentation is going out. So we'll have it at hand. So next item then is 2078 from Maria Brown, Chief State Solicitor, dated 29th of March, providing a breakdown of outstanding lottery grant cases for the year ended 2018 as requested by the committee. Ms Brown says that the correct terminology is outstanding files as opposed to outstanding cases. So we're being corrected on our terminology. There are 174 files outstanding at the end of 2018. So we note and publish this. This is when they were in, we asked a question about the number of files that they had, where they had to go through their office for voluntary organisations who had made application for national lottery funds, and we were all experiencing some delay. So they're outlining that. Maria Brown is outlining the details. So there's quite a few still outstanding. Now, they say some of the cases have been dealt with from their point of view, but they're waiting for confirmation from the third-party solicitors in some case. So the documentation is there. We note and publish that. Next item is from Aidan O'Driscoll, reference number 2080, Secretary-General, Department of Justice, providing information requested by the committee in relation to court service statistics. It appears that the department and the courts is unable to provide the number of non-legally aided persons before the courts. We note and publish this. We had asked, they'd given us details in relation to legal aid cases, and we asked, if they knew the total number of cases, could we work out how many non-legally aid cases, free legal aid was provided, and they say they can't do that because the letter says legal aid certs can refer to a single offence or a category of offences. A defendant appearing before the courts could be granted a number of legal aid certs for offences in the one case, or could have a number of legal aid certs referring to different cases before the court. So they don't actually correct that, but they go on to say that most cases, as indicated previously, legal aid is granted by the courts in the majority of indictable offences dealt with in the Circuit Court electoral and special criminal courts. The court services advised that this would refer to at least 95% of these cases. In the district court, they advised that approximately 70% of defendants get free legal aid, and they say the main reason why numbers don't deal with what they refer to as minor road traffic offences like speeding or tax cert or NCT certs not being displayed. So it's approximately 70% in the district court get free legal aid, and approximately 95% of people at circuit courts, central and special criminal courts get legal aid. So that's, I think, as much information as they have, and generally answers the question we had. So we know it and publish that. Next item is category C, item correspondence related to private individuals and other correspondence. There are 3 items, 1872, 1876 and 1886, which we want to discuss in private session in relation to University of Limerick. So we'll have a short private session here before we go into public session with our witnesses very soon. So next item correspondence 2072 from an individual dated 25th of March. The individual raised a number of matters in relation to the governments of KWETB and the failure to get a response to the questions raised. The correspondence also raises questions in relation to evidence given by witnesses of the Kildare Wicklow ETB to our committee. So the members want to discuss this. One thing we could do is get the person who wrote into us permission to forward the correspondence to the department, whether the matters relating to KWETB are being examined, and to provide a response to the committee. So in relation to the evidence given witnesses to the committee, in section 7 of the letter I propose writing to the chair of Kildare Wicklow ETB for a collated response in respect to the specific matters in the evidence referred to by the correspondent. So the members want to do as I suggested, or hold it over with a consideration of the KWETB correspondence that we received.
Hold it all over.
Look, they're both under one topic.
Is that 2072?
It's 2072, yeah.
They are and they aren't on the one topic.
No, they are and they aren't, yeah. So, Deputy, have you got any
some of this stuff, some of the things that are raised, and they're legitimate points that are raised, some of it is really for their own board. Internal. Some of it is the failure at Department of Education level as well. Now, haven't we forwarded something to the Department of Education on foot of didn't we write to the Department of Education on foot of a lot of these things in relation to KWETB? Yeah, not just immediately recently. Previously we did. Right. So would the Deputy suggest we go through the points and some that sort of items, as you said, those relevant to the department, we write to the department. Those relevant to the internal workings of the KWETB that should be addressed within the organisation, we not follow up at this stage. I know that would be highly complicated, lots of issues there. So, what do you think? Yeah, we can't do the work of the board. No. And that's not our function. No. So I think we've got to separate those things out. Maybe go back to the individual and say, with the things that are really properly the remit of the board, and then maybe strip out the things. We might have a better, be able to see the wood for the trees for the want of a better. So we'll write back to the correspondent, acknowledging what we've got, ask them to separate the issues they want us to deal with through the department.
Perhaps ask or to clarify, have these issues been brought up with the board? I don't know whether the person is writing in desperation to us, and I certainly agree with Deputy Murphy. I certainly agree with Deputy Murphy that we can't do the work of the board.
No, we're not.
The minutiae will but it should be clarified, have these matters been brought to the attention of the board? If so, when, and is it reflected in the minutes?
Yeah.
That's
we'll ask that question. Yeah. Yeah, and some of I've had a look at it, some items refer to the audit committee and other items refer to why board meetings weren't held to discuss particular items or particular matters before their appearance here. That's a matter for the board, not for us. I will put in the record, we invite the accounting officer or chairpersons of board here every week. It's not as a requirement of any of these organisations that they have a board meeting before their appearance here to in some way maybe instruct or suggest to the accounting officer or the chairman of the board how they should conduct themselves here. I don't think we would be happy if
there are meetings of every organisation's board before they come here, because that could be interpreted in all sorts of ways. So, you know, I don't necessarily agree that there should have been a board meeting specifically to discuss the appearance at a PAC. That's what the accounting officer is paid to do, to report here, not to discuss his evidence to the board. So, Seamus, would you have another? Am I being reasonable?
No, I think obviously the obligations are on individual chief executives and accounting officers when they come here to give their own evidence and not anybody else's evidence or anybody else's direction. But I suppose there were challenges arising from the 2015 audit in relation to KWETB that have created considerable difficulties for the current chief executive and for the board and for the department. So I think there are questions all round about the adequacy of the systems of governance, and I think the points that are raised here speak to those difficulties and those challenges. And I think there are lessons to be learned here. The question is, what are those lessons?
And if you don't change the culture, for example, addressing those things at the board, for example, why was legal advice, why were the board not consulted, things like that, unless they're addressed at board level, that cultural change won't happen. It's not here that we need to hear that, it's there that they need to hear. My
understanding is that there have been discussions and consideration of those matters, of some of those matters at least, at board meetings. Right. Okay. Now, what the resolution of them are is...
I think the department assume a more hands-on monitoring approach in relation to this board, did it not?
I can't speak to that.
Yeah, but like, as you say, it's not our job to investigate what goes on.
No, but was there not a direction?
There was a direction issued.
And with that direction, there were conditions and a time limit. I mean, I think it's serious when somebody's taken that trouble to write into us, and I don't wish to give the impression that we don't want to deal with it. That's not correct at all. We've given a lot of time, and we'll give more time. But as the Controller and Auditor General said, there were issues arising that gave cause for concern to your office and to the department and to us. And the response to that was discussion here, your report, and then the direction with conditions and a time. So it's the department, or is it the Higher Education Authority? I can't remember which, one or the other.
No, it's the department in relation to
the direction.
Training boards.
Yeah. So, just here, maybe it's where is the department in relation to its monitoring of all the new procedures that were to go in there? Okay,
just so people will understand, the issue is there are about 7 headings. I'm not getting into any of the specifics, so people will understand what we're discussing. The person who writes to us questions, why was legal advice withheld from the board? The question, the departure of 2 audit committee chairs since September 2018. Who are the parties to leases and licenses with whom the KWETB has entered an agreement? The schedule of meetings between the board and the department. Complaints being dealt with appropriately within the KWETB. Do we have appropriate safeguards against abuse of the appointment system within the KWETB? Inaccurate or misleading statements at the recent PAC meeting with KWETB. Concerns, and then there's concerns because the clock is running down, the board's term of office will end, I presume, at the local election very shortly. So, out of all those, there's only one, item number 7, specifically directed to the PAC in our hearings. All the others are very much internal matters within how the board operates. So,
the point that David Connolly made is important, though, because the Department of Education had a watch and brief on after the 2012 report and the VEC. Then we had what emerged as quite a dysfunctional board, and there's a Garda inquiry, and there's been a full independent report done as well. So this is not a minor deal. If the department are going to have a watching brief, or if they've issued a circular, I think that we have to be sure that they are taking that seriously.
Do we address this to the department then? I think directly, because this is what the department and the KWETB should be doing on an ongoing. It's not our job to get in and micromanage the firm. And Deputy O'Brien indicated.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think there's some serious questions that need answering. Whether this is the committee for those answers to be provided, I'm not 100% certain, Chair, and I'll take some direction on that. But I know when they did appear before us, there was a number of follow-up items that we had requested. To the best of my knowledge, none of them have come in yet. They did send in one piece of correspondence.
Well, we got items the last day and we published it, but have held over the discussion on it. Do we want to follow it up for?
We did get one item of correspondence which we didn't actually ask for in relation to a building which I don't think was even raised at the committee, and some of the stuff that we did ask for hasn't been forthcoming. If it has come in since then, I haven't seen it yet. But it's
no, Deputy, what we've said, we've got the correspondence for the last day, and there's quite a bit in it, and the members hadn't fully read through it, and we've agreed to hold over that. And if there are questions unanswered, we'll deal with them the next day, because we just haven't done it yet. Okay, will we address, should we send this to the Secretary General of the Department?
I think we should send it, and I think we'd ask for an update on what has happened since they gave the direction and whatever else they gave, and ask for an update on what's happened.
And we have, again, to write to the person who wrote into it, getting their permission for us to send it to the Department. Okay?
And then what about the questions for the PAC?
And the one issue was the one item where they refer to inaccurate or misleading statements at the recent PAC meeting. I think we'll write directly to the KWETB in respect to the evidence given at this committee. That's our affair.
That's in relation to whether they had been in receipt of legal advice, is that?
It's about legal advice, yeah. Exactly, and the Chairman gave an answer, so I think we'll ask for confirmation or clarification of the answers given, or to respond to that part of the report with the consent of the person who wrote to us to forward that to them. Okay? Grand. So I think we're clear then. We have to get the consent. The bit related to the PAC meeting will write directly back to the board members who were here, the accounting officer, and the other item we'll send to the department and ask them for them to respond, following, arising from their earlier direction on the matter. Okay, next item then is 2082. It's from an individual dated the 28th of March who has previously corresponded with the committee, advising the committee regarding a High Court ruling that was due, I think it's due this week, will deliver its decision on the matter this Friday, which is, I think, perhaps maybe last Friday, or I'm not sure, is it this Friday? Last Friday.
And the judgment has been given, as I understand it.
Now, just so people, and if you know something about it, I don't know about the judgment. It was an individual who was in contact with ourselves, sought information under Freedom of Information in relation to the value for money for Irish public bodies mutual insurance, and that was granted by the Information Commissioner, and the LGMA, I think, refused to issue it, and that was the subject of the High Court proceedings last week. And have you any indication, did the court? I don't remember.
I think the High Court said that there was not a presumption that information should be forthcoming, something along those lines. I was only reading it yesterday.
Yeah, I know that the judgment has been given. I'd prefer not to go on record in relation to it. I mean, it is quite...
Look, we'll get our own update on that.
Is that 2082?
Yeah. That's 2082.
I think the lady mentioned there is on record as saying she is very happy with the judgment.
Is that right? Okay.
I think the information is to be released.
Yeah, it's to be released. I think it was a very positive judgment, but I haven't read it.
So it is to be released, but it wasn't, but the court...
I understand. I haven't read it. I've only sped read it, and it's a positive judgment. And Dorothy Dowling, who set up the initial...
And she was chairperson of...
She said she was very happy with the judgment.
Okay, we'll get that, because
I think I get it.
The reason the correspondent wrote to this committee is this committee was actually dealing with the issue of insurance claims and the insurance claims. How it arose is this. The State Claims Agency were in here, and they handle all state claims against the state for most government bodies. They indicated to us during the course of that meeting here back, I think last year, that they had now taken over dealing with all the Section 38 organisations that previously weren't. We know from our own knowledge here they have received approximately at least 4 billion of state funding in relation to their activities,
and it's probably welcome. It's now centralised under the State Claims Agency. They had come to that agreement. During the course of that, because we had local authorities here, I raised with them, have they had discussions with doing the same for the local authorities, who also get approximately 4 billion or thereabouts, and a lot of claims come in, and there's absolutely no visibility or transparency as to how they were being dealt with. At least there is some through the State Claims Agency. And arising from that, Dorothea Dowling, and her name is on the public record, wrote to us, complimenting us, inquiring out the matter and explaining about she had already been on the case and was due to the High Court. So we were both independently expressing a keen interest on this issue. So when we get the ruling on that, it is something we will consider as part of our next interim report when we're dealing with the state claim. I think we have to finalise our work on the State Claims Agency.
I think the court case I was looking at yesterday was maybe a different one. It was in relation to UCC and the Information Commissioner.
No, this is
this is Irish public bodies and the local government.
It was a different one.
Yeah, okay. Look, we get
I think actually, Chairman, the committee had requested the same report that Ms Dowling was looking for, and it was declined.
Yeah, we had written to the LGMA, as I recall, before Christmas, seeking that, and it had been declined. So we're voting for.
Just for the record as well, the IPB is the insurer of the ETBs.
Well, I understand that as well. So they just. And would they have any role in relation to the Oireachtas even? I'm not sure. I think they might handle our public liability insurance as members in our offices as well. Perhaps. I stand corrected on that.
Could get a copy of the judgment circulated to all.
And exactly. And it's an issue of interest.
If members are interested, they can read it and we can discuss it again.
No, I'm very pleased that we have a conclusion to that, because it's an item we raised. That's very good. So the next item then, that was 2082. Next item is 2084 from an individual who we dealt with last week, regarding item 2070 in relation to the election observer roster. The individual has provided a correction. The briefing last week stated the individual was not granted a place on the roster and has taken an appeal to the High Court. The correspondence says this is not correct. What the individual has stated was that the department made a number of had made a number of complaints about him to the Information Commissioner in the High Court, and that he was appealing at what he says was a great personal cost, the High Court judgment to the Court of Appeal. I'm happy to put this correction on the record, but I do not believe it changes our decision that the selection process for the election roster is not a matter for the PAC. I thank the individual for correcting this, and we note that item. So we note that. So the next item,
to keep on the, it's not a matter for the PSC. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Just in relation to the procedure in place, I'm not doing it now because I actually have 2 letters to look at and come back to, and that's all. Just to clarify, I keep raising this issue. I'm not raising it effectively enough, so I'm going to go back and look at it and come back on it.
I think
nothing to do with the letter.
No, but did we cover this in a periodic report?
I'm sure we did, but I just, for the moment, I'll go back and look at the letter.
And we'll check.
Thanks. And I'll check and see.
Because we dealt with this before. We've either dealt with it in a previous periodic report, or it had to be considered.
It could well be sorted out. I don't know. I just need to check.
Okay. No, we know there was a gap on that, between the appointments and everything like that.
I mean, can I just raise an item in relation to the periodic report? And like, one of the things that we looked for was with RTE, the Eversheds review in the periodic report of number 3, May 2018. And I've been contacted by somebody to say that they're one of these people who's affected by it, but that there's nothing has happened 12 months on. Can I just, can I ask that we get a full update on progress on that, so that we follow through on this? Because we legitimately raised, we had an engagement with RTE here, and in actual fact we couldn't deal with some of the issues because we were waiting.
And was this in relation to self-employed contract?
Yes, it is, yeah.
And my recollection is they told us that they're dealing with it with all new contracts, but people were concerned, how about all the people who've been there prior to this new change of policy? And we didn't get the impression they were being dealt with. So we need an update.
There was an expectation that, and 12 months later, nothing had happened.
Okay.
So I presume we'll write back to them and look for an update. And will there be a full implementation of that report? And maybe they'll assure us on that.
Okay, that's agreed. That's agreed. Okay, so that's and following through. So the next item then is accounts and statements received since the last meeting. There are 4 to go up on the screen, I think. Okay, the first one then is Letterkenny Institute of Technology, clear audit opinion, Nursing and Midwifery Board of Ireland. It's a clear audit opinion, but again, the issue of superannuation entitlements, as in all the health sectors, is mentioned. The Law Reform Commission 2017 is a clear audit opinion, Northern Survey of Ireland, clear audit opinion, and again, the OCI recognises a deferred pension funding asset. Just explain that again. Funding asset.
It's similar to in the third level sector. They're in a trading position, so they're selling product. They recognise a deferred pension funding asset that, if their trading doesn't generate enough resources to pay pensions, that the state will meet the liability into the future.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. That's that item dealt with. So next item briefly then on the work programme, going up on the screen.
Just before we do the work programme, there's 2 reports that we're expecting to deal with. One is the one about the National Broadband Plan, and there's a time issue in relation to that. When are we likely to have a draft of that?
I've asked that we be in a position to issue that at the end of this month. So that gives the Secretariat a couple of weeks. There is the Easter recess, so immediately we're back. Immediately we're back. We would hope to have. There's 2 sections in that report. One is broadband, and the other is housing. So we're bringing those 2 items.
So is that going to be one report, or
it'll be one report dealing with 2 items?
Right. Okay.
And that will be a chunk of the next periodic report being done at this stage. So our target now is for the end of this month. And I just want to put on record again what the department said here, because I think people didn't fully grasp, because there was a debate in the Dáil last week as well with the Minister on that particular issue. He said, they're dealing with one tender, and he was going to bring a proposal to the government in the near future. I think the public picked that up, and I think a lot of people interpreted that there would be a decision regarding the contract, whereas the Secretary-General made it absolutely clear here the last day the only proposal that would be going to government in the near future was to appoint Brendan McCourt or not as the preferred bidder. So when they get the preferred bidder status, there's still no contractual obligation from the government. It's not a contract for rural broadband. It gives them certainty, so they can then go and negotiate their infrastructure agreements with AIR and other people. They have a bit of certainty now to go and finalise the detailed costs. And when that's all put together, whether it takes, I don't know what period of time, then the government can consider signing a contract or otherwise at that point. And there have been cases in the past where preferred bidders have been approved by the Cabinet and circumstances changed and the contract was never signed at a loss and a cost to the preferred bidder because there's no contractual obligation. So I'm just saying the proposal to the government is not to sign the National Broadband Plan contract, is only to appoint a preferred bidder. Significant step along the way, but it's not the entire process, as I think people understood it from the debate, perhaps that emanated in the Dáil chamber last week, but that was more, the debate here was more specific on that issue. So I'm just putting that on the record now that you do mention it to avoid, or maybe to clarify that matter for the public. So our target is the end of this month, which is only a few weeks away.
Yeah, and the level of detail that will be provided along, if that's the decision that's made, that to appoint them as preferred bidder, the amount of detail in relation to that is not known at this stage.
No, so I think our report will have to put clear signposts and signals in relation to the tendering process that's gone on since the end of December 2015 at this stage. I think our report will have to put clear signposts and issues from a value for money and a public expenditure point of view in our report. But we'll only get to discuss that after the Easter break, I think.
But we'll try and deal with it as quickly as possible at that stage, because we know the time is of the essence.
And one of the other things in relation to that is, and I don't want to labour the point, but some of the fixed wireless providers contacted some of us after some of the hearings we had here, and you know, where there was a kind of the headline figure in relation to the per metre costs. I certainly have had people who told me that there was an expectation that there was going to be a reduction at wholesale level for you know, in terms of their dealings with ENET. And
Are you talking about MAMS now, or broadband? MAMS. You're talking about the Metropolitan Area Network now.
Yeah, and in actual fact, what's happened has been that the invoices, the quotes they got increased rather than decreased the amount. So I'm not sure we got information.
If the deputy wants to send us some note,
do that. Yeah.
We'll consider it next week and take it up, because if that's an issue, we need that addressed and dealt with, and we will write to make sure we have an answer on that. So our report that when we make in a number of weeks' time will include what's been suggested now. So there will be points of clarification we'll have to get before we conclude our report. And that sounds like one of them.
Right.
Okay? Yeah. Thanks. Okay, so that's the council statement. So the work programme then is coming up on the screen. So today we have Department of Justice. Next week we have the CSO and the CNAG's office, and possibly in private session. We did receive a request for a meeting in relation to the National Paediatric Hospital from Professor Chris Fitzpatrick. Do people want to proceed with that? There's an offer there that he is, somebody remind me his position. I know he's a consultant. He's paediatric consultant. I'm not sure which hospital. I'm not sure which hospital he's associated.
Or is he associated with UCD?
He wants to give.
He's a consultant obstetrician at the Coombe.
And what does he want to present before the committee in relation?
He was questioning the location of the Children's Hospital.
The trial issue aspect, I think, might be the issue, because whether or not, I think.
Yeah, it's on the screen. What we can do is, part of our next periodic report, we'll be dealing with this issue. We won't be dealing with it with the one at the end of this month, which is only 2 topics on it. And if we feel before we do that report that we want to invite, I think we actually.
I just have a different opinion on that, and I've waited. I do think we should hear him. I think he's gone to the trouble. The letter is very well written. The issues are set out. I think it would do no harm. But I mean, the valid questions as to what we can do about it, or is it relevant? But we've had people in before us. I don't think it would take a lot of time, even if it was private. I don't mind. I'm open to suggestions.
I would suggest we do it in private session next Thursday after we deal with the vote in the CNAG. Yeah.
Why would it need to be in private session?
I'm open to it.
Don't know. Well, we haven't.
Perhaps we're going into private session in a minute to discuss
we'll discuss it in private session.
Discuss what we're doing.
Okay, that's a very good suggestion. Okay.
And Neil, I know I was out there for a second, but just on the issue of incontinence wear, you remember the family, and we had the people in. So. I suppose unofficially on behalf of the committee, I facilitated a meeting between the HSE, the family and the Brothers of Charity, and that took place last Monday, and I very much hope the situation then concluded. So.
Okay, that's fantastic. That's great, because it was a difficult situation that we dealt with. So we'll discuss that there in private session in a few moments. So then next week, or then on the 18th to the 4th, we're dealing with the Environment Protection Agency. Then there's the non-sitting weeks after Easter. So that would mean it should be early May.
On the dates there, because you were just going through the dates, I did note that there's a meeting scheduled the day before the local and European elections.
Yeah.
Well, I'm open-minded, but what sort of attendance can we expect? Is the Dáil sitting that week, and will people be around? I'm just putting it out there.
I suspect that Dáil is sitting. I don't want to skip a meeting now. Look, we'll discuss it closer to the time. As of now, we'll hold on to it, you know, as of now. So it does look now it's going to be the beginning of May before we have that report on broadband and housing, because we want to meet in the first week of May, a non-sitting week, if we have a draft report and people want to come up for. But people might want to travel, you know, during the non-sitting week. I'm not recommending it. I'm just raising it. Okay. So we'll come back to that. So then on the 9th of May we have the Garda Síochána, and there's a report in the CNAG's report relevant to that on overtime. On the 16th to the 5th we have the National Paediatric Development Board. The financial statements resumed. That's the 16th of May. And we expect to have the PwC report considered by the board in advance of that meeting. Then we have the court services on the 23rd to the 5th. And on the 30th of May, we have the Department of Finance and a special report from the CNAG dealing with EU transactions. And then we have Children and Youth Affairs on the 13th of June. And we've also put in then the following week. These are provisional. NTMA annual report will be out, and that handles an awful lot of issues on behalf of the state. And then on the 26th, the HSE financial statements are normally out for 2018 in advance of that, and we would always try and do that before we go away. And then we have the Houses of the Oireachtas Commission. We want to do that before the break as well, but their annual report will be out about the end of June. So we're as well having their annual report before we have our meeting, you know. So that's why I thought we might have done it earlier, but if their annual report is out around the end of June, and that would be the Secretary General of the Oireachtas in on that. So they're provisional items, and we can come back to other items, but that's an approximate work programme subject to change. Okay. So I think then at this stage there's a couple of items we want to discuss in private session, so we're now going to go into private session for a few moments before we call our witnesses from the Department of Justice. So we're now in private session. We're now back in public session. Today we're examining the appropriation accounts for Vote 24, the Department of Justice and Equality for the year 2017. We're joined by the following: Adrian O'Driscoll, Secretary General; Una McPhillips, Deputy Secretary General; Donncha O'Sullivan, Assistant Secretary; Michael Curran, Assistant Secretary; Carol Baxter, Assistant Secretary; Mark Wilson, Principal Officer; Seamus Clifford, Principal Officer; and Marie Tracy, Assistant Principal. And from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, we're joined by John Burke, Principal Officer. Can I remind members and witnesses and those at the public galleries to put all mobile phones onto airplane mode, as merely putting them onto silent will interfere with the recording system. So I wish to advise witnesses that by virtue of 17(2)(1) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to the committee. If you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence.
You're directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you're to ask to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against a person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members of the committee are reminded of the provisions of standing orders that the committee shall refrain from inquiring into the merits of policy or policies of the government or of a minister of the government or of the merits of the objectives of such policies. And while we expect witnesses to answer questions put to the committee clearly and with candour, witnesses can and should expect to be treated fairly and with respect and consideration of all, at all times in accordance with the witness protocol. I think we have an opening statement from the CNAG. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Vote 24, Justice and Equality, provides funding for a broad range of services and activities undertaken directly by the Department of Justice and Equality or funded by the Department through the provision of grants. This includes the Probation Service, the Irish Naturalisation and Immigration Service, the Reception and Integration Agency, the State Pathology Service and the Garda Ombudsman Commission. An overview of the main funded services and agencies is given in a summary diagram which I've attached to this opening statement. The policy and oversight remit of the Department has changed somewhat since the beginning of 2017, and this is reflected in the appropriation account. Responsibility for the Charities Regulatory Authority transferred from the Department of Justice and Equality to the Department of Rural and Community Development in July 2017. In accordance with standard government accounting procedures, the voted expenditure related to the authority for all of 2017 is reflected in the appropriation account of the Department of Rural and Community Development. Responsibility for Ordnance Survey Ireland and the votes of the Valuation Office and the Property Registration Authority transferred from the Department of Justice and Equality to the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government in 2018. The 2017 appropriation account for Vote 24 records gross expenditure of almost €423 million in the year, which was spread across 5 spending programmes, and I've indicated those in the figure which is now on screen. The programmes are organised in line with statements of strategic objectives. Note 3 of the appropriation account provides a breakdown of the programme spending under subheads that indicate the instruments used by the Department to achieve those objectives. On the receipt side, appropriations in aid of the vote total just over €66 million in 2017. Almost 3/4 of this related to a range of fees charged in respect of immigration registration, nationality and citizenship certification and visa issuance. The net expenditure on the vote was around €22 million less than was provided for in the 2017 estimate. In my report on the appropriation account, I drew attention to a material level of non-compliance with EU and national procurement rules in respect of contracts operated by the Department in 2017. Further detail in relation to this is disclosed by the Accounting Officer in the Statement on Internal Financial Control. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you indeed. And Mr. Driscoll, can we have your opening statement, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The Department's vote is one of 6 votes, which currently makes up the Justice vote group. The Justice and Equality vote, which we're examining today, accounts for 18% of gross expenditure in the overall vote group. The Garda vote accounts for 64% of gross expenditure. Prisons and courts are 13% and 5% of gross expenditure respectively, with the remaining votes for the Policing Authority and the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission accounting for less than 1%. However, our focus today is on Vote 24, the Justice and Equality vote. The Department's vote covers a wide remit, encompassing both the administrative divisions of the Department and a broad range of offices and agencies across the justice sector. In all, there are approximately 60 individual subheads reflected across 5 expenditure programmes, which are set out in your briefing material and which support the overall Department's vision of a safe, fair and inclusive Ireland. The remit of the Department is broad and diverse and includes subheads in relation to commissions and special inquiries, legal aid, both civil and criminal, immigration and asylum accommodation, the Probation Service, Equality, Integration and Disability, and a range of other services, including offices and agencies such as the Data Protection Commission, Criminal Assets Bureau, Forensic Science and State Pathology Laboratories, the Garda Ombudsman Commission, etc. As there is no specific chapter relating to justice and equality vote in the CNAG's report for 2017, I propose to focus briefly on a few areas within the vote where there have been developments in the last couple of years. The committee will be aware that the Department is undergoing a major transformation programme at present. This arises from the Government's acceptance of the final report of the Effectiveness and Renewal Group, ERG, in June 2018, following significant political and public debate. This programme aims to develop a future operating model that embraces the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century, which enhances organisational agility and responsiveness and places the Department of Justice and Equality at the forefront of developments in the Irish civil service. I'm pleased to say that significant progress is being made. The Department has now been realigned under 2 executive pillars, each headed by a Deputy Secretary, with Una Buckley heading up the Civil Justice and Equality pillar and Una McPhillips, who joins me today, heading up the Criminal Justice pillar. The 2 executive pillars will be supported by a central corporate pillar. A new corporate governance structure reflecting this realignment came into operation from January of this year. The second phase involves the Department designing and implementing a new operating model and organisational structure in the 2 executive pillars, based on 5 core functions: policy, operations, transparency, governance and legislation. The transformation programme has been overseen by a programme board chaired by myself and including the Secretary-General to the Government, the Secretary-General of the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation and the Vote Assistant Secretary for DEPAR, which ensures that the programme is conducted in accordance with good governance principles, that it is delivered on time within budget and that the design solutions are appropriate. In addition, the ERG continues to provide its input and produces quarterly progress reports which are published on the Department website. The Department has completed the high-level design of the new operating model and structure and has now moved to detailed design. The programme is due for completion by early October this year. Funding for this programme has been provided in the Justice and Equality vote in 2019. Simultaneously, there is also a very significant policing reform programme ongoing in relation to the implementation of the recommendations of the Commission on the Future of Policing. The Department is facilitating and supporting this programme, including the provision of funding to An Garda Síochána to assist with certain work under the programme. I would also like to mention the Data Protection Commission, which has received significant additional funding in recent years to build the organisation's capacity and capability in preparation for the DPC's enhanced regulatory powers and more prominent international role under GDPR. These increased resources have facilitated the recruitment of additional staff, including legal, technical, audit and investigation specialists, as well as policy and administrative staff. The budget allocation of the organisation increased from 1.9 million in 2014 to 7.2 million in 2017 and has increased further to 15.2 million in 2019. This resource level will enable the DPC to continue to build the organisation's knowledge and capability in the performance of its expanded statutory role as an EU-wide regulator and lead supervisory authority for the large multinational technology companies, many of whom have their European headquarters in Ireland. Committee members will be well aware of the pressures in our accommodation system for asylum seekers. Currently, the Department is managing a total of 6,497 international protection applicants, including 5,980 residing in our accommodation centres and a further 517 in emergency hotel accommodation. At the end of 2016, the Department was accommodating 4,425 people. However, by the end of 2017, the number had risen to 5,096, an increase of 15%. And at the end of 2018, there were 6,106 people in accommodation. The increasing numbers to be accommodated is a significant part of the challenge facing the asylum system. A process to support residents moving into mainstream housing is being finalised through the establishment of a dedicated unit working with centre managers, NGOs and local authorities. Another expanding area in the department is the Irish Naturalisation and Immigration Service, INIS, which has grown considerably in scale and scope since it was established in 2005. INIS now comprises approximately 1/3 of all staff in the department, processing over 250,000 applications a year. The role of INIS has expanded over recent years to include areas such as border management at Dublin Airport, immigration registrations in the Dublin metropolitan area, and the newly established Irish Passenger Information Unit. INIS has put a service improvement plan in place for the period 2018 to 2020, which, while ambitious in scope, is also realistic. The actions can be delivered, we believe, within the timeframe set out, and a strong programme board has been established to make sure this is the case. Some early reforms have included the introduction of plain language in all INIS application forms, the launch of INIS Online, a new customer portal which will allow all applications and payments to be submitted online by the end of March 2020, and the establishment of a change management unit within INIS to drive innovation and best practice in project and change management. It is clear to all of us working in the department that the demands we face in the immigration area are likely to continue to grow over the coming years. Meeting those demands requires that we seek to deliver our services in different ways and to increase our efficiency while also improving customer experiences. These objectives are entirely compatible with the overall departmental transformation programme. 2017, the year under examination, was of course an important year in the development of a strategic approach to equality. 4 major equality strategies were launched that year: the National Strategy for Women and Girls, the National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy, the National Disability Inclusion Strategy and the Migrant Integration Strategy. These represent a whole-of-government approach to addressing the needs of diverse groups and to ensuring their equal participation in Irish society. Each strategy was developed and is being implemented with the involvement of the groups that each is designed to serve. 2017 was also, of course, the year in which the Irish state formally recognised travellers as an ethnic minority. This landmark recognition is a key step forward in fostering a society which respects and celebrates diverse identities. In that context, I should say that my department is currently developing a national LGBTI strategy, which will be published later this year. Finally, I would note that Brexit has been a significant area of work since the UK referendum, and this remains the case. The Department of Justice and Equality shares this agenda with all other government departments and is working within the highly coordinated whole-of-government structures led by the Department of the Taoiseach and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Chairman, with that, I and my colleagues will be happy to answer any questions that members have.
Thank you indeed.
You even have an EORG?
We have an EORG.
An unfortunate acronym, I think.
Okay, interesting. So we'll now take our speakers in the following sequence who have indicated as follows. Catherine Connolly is 20 minutes. Second speaker is Alan Farrell, who is designated second speaker. Then all other speakers have 10 minutes in the following sequence. Deputy Marc MacSharry, Deputy Catherine Murphy, Deputy Seán Cassells and Deputy Jonathan O'Brien. So, Deputy Connolly.
And you're very welcome, and thank you for the information and the briefing documents, and also thank you to the Controller and Auditor General's Office for his briefing documents in relation to this. It's very helpful, and congratulations on a clear audit. Okay, so that has to be said as well, except in relation to procurement, which I'm going to come to. But just to take to the end, you know, the strategies that just caught my attention, all of the positive strategies, and you're about to develop another one for gay, lesbian, transsexual people. We have 4 major equality strategies. They're wonderful on paper. Just what is the implementation of those in terms of different departments, and when it comes to the budget? Are there practical measures for the proofing of decisions taken by government? Yeah, just if you...
Well, first of all, thank you for the congratulations on the clear audit. I agree with you, it's very important. On the equality strategies, there is a very strong follow-up process. In fact, the purpose of the strategies really is to drive a whole-of-government approach, so to create a situation where there are a large number of actions under each of these strategies.
I understand all that,
yeah.
And the reason you had to bring in strategies because of the inequality and because of the failure.
Yeah.
So we have the strategies now, but just the steps, and you're telling me there's a very clear follow-up What is that follow-up?
The follow-up is, as I say, that there's a large number of actions under each strategy.
Okay.
These are allocated to specific departments and agencies. And then there are regular meetings, generally chaired by the Minister of State, David Stanton, to follow up on progress on each of these actions. And regular progress reports are also
would there be
issued.
proofing of you know, like equality proofing, poverty proofing, in relation to these strategies? Would there be proofing in relation to actions being taken by particularly in terms of the budget?
Yes, exactly. So, what I'm saying is that in each of the actions is itself related to the equality objective, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, under the Traveller strategy, there's a whole set of actions for each government department. We make sure our role, and the Minister of State's role, is to make sure that each of those bodies is doing what they should. That then is built into their work programmes, their strategy statements and so on. And in that sense, it's equality proofed.
Would we see something that's open and accountable where this has actually been implemented?
Yes, in the reports on progress under each of the strategies.
Okay.
And I think that is very visible, and the detail in those is quite significant. So yes, I think there is a very open and accountable approach.
You wanted to come in, Ms. Baxter, did you, sir? No. Sorry, I don't know what the procedure is, but I see you're nodding in relation to this. Is it?
Just to say, Deputy, that we have a traffic light approach where essentially every action is tracked against progress, and essentially, as the Secretary-General has said, the Ministers chair oversight committees which actually include representatives of civil society as well as government departments and public agencies, so they actually also track the implementation of actions, and the traffic light system is then a public document.
Okay. All right. Just staying with your opening statement, and it relates to the vote in relation to the Magdalen Laundry ex gratia scheme, and money has been saved on that. Okay, so we have the ex gratia scheme, and then we had the extension of that as a result of the Ombudsman's report, isn't that right?
That's right.
And unfortunately, we needed an Ombudsman report, I have to say. It disappointed me that we needed that. I thought we might have learned in relation to all of the schemes we've had and roll it out properly. But in any event, can you update me on why there are savings and where we're at? I'm on page 22. No, I'm not actually. I'm not. On page 22. I'm on page 20. Yeah. The Magdalen Fund. And the estimate provision was 4 million plus. The outturn was very substantially below that. Yeah. So just quickly now, I see a capacity, the Act, we all know about the Act, and there's a delay in implementing part of that, and you're given that as one reason. So just give me the reasons why there's an underspend, and what is the total number of applications, please? And the total awards.
I'll do that, yes.
Okay.
The saving is due mainly to a delay that occurred in commencing the Assistant Decision-Making Capacity Act.
Yeah.
And thus payments could not be made
where are we now
in a number of cases.
Where
we are now is that in all of the capacity cases, but one has been paid, as I understand it.
So there was 17, I think, outstanding.
Yes, and they've all been paid bar one.
Bar one, and
yeah.
that's for particular reasons, is it?
It is, yes.
Okay.
That has been, as you know, Deputy, a senior counsel is going through all of these individual cases.
Yeah.
So I take it that there is a reason why that one case is still outstanding.
So what is the total number of applications under the scheme and the extended scheme, and how much has been paid out?
Yeah, there were 720 cases, 721 cases under the scheme, and 27.341 million was paid out under the original scheme.
For 721 applications?
Yeah.
Okay, and how many were successful?
I think they are the number one that were paid, actually.
They were the ones that were paid.
Yeah.
So how many applications as opposed to how many were successful? If you don't, a note will do to me.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
So we're working on 721 applications.
That's right, paid.
Okay, who've received a payment in total of 27.4 million.
Yeah, no, the 721 is the number paid.
Yeah. Okay.
In relation to the secondary scheme which you referred to, there are 97 applications for that. Now, 52 of those...
Just 97, and 7 have been paid out of them.
8, I think.
8 now. Okay, so explain the other 89 now.
Will do. So just to explain the 97, though, 52 of those, just to avoid confusion, were applicants under the old scheme who have entered now the new scheme. They were refused under the old scheme, so it bears on your earlier question.
So 52 were refused under the old scheme,
and
had
45,
to go through the old scheme, have now to go through this scheme?
Yes.
Okay.
There are 45 are new applicants under the new scheme.
Yeah.
Sorry, I see my latest briefing says 9 were paid.
9, that's okay.
2 have offers outstanding, 10 are not eligible, and 1 has withdrawn.
Yeah. And is there a delay? How are we doing on time in relation to processes?
I would like this to be moving faster, to be perfectly honest with you, Deputy.
Why isn't it? Just given the vulnerability and the age?
Yeah, I'll explain it now, if you will. Just give me a second. So we have been putting in place a data sharing agreement with religious bodies, which now has been put in place just literally in the last week or two. With that in place, we think that the remaining, assuming that the information flows, the remaining people under that scheme should be paid very quickly.
Why has it taken that long for data sharing? It was something very basic now.
It took a while to negotiate that.
Why?
But it is now in place.
What was the difficulty in relation? That's very basic. Sorry now, but I have a particular interest in it. I've been there in many guises in a previous life. But mostly my concern is in relation to effectiveness of a scheme.
And I completely share that. And look, I know you share it. Yeah. But what steps? Why did it take so long? When is it envisaged now that everybody will receive, those who are entitled to payment? Why did because to get the data, we did have to put the data sharing agreements in place. You know, we are all bound, and the religious, to be fair to the religious orders, they are also bound by the provisions of the GDPR and so on. So we do have to put these steps in place. But I would hope that with this now important step now taken, that payments can be made.
Okay, I'm not going to go into
over the next few weeks.
Lovely. I'm not going into details. Look, but we do receive letters as outlining desperation and outlining difficulties. They've actually given me permission to use their name, but I don't want to. But my experience tells me when it was the same with Caranua. In theory, very good, and then in practice, people have great difficulties. So it's an internal division within the Department of Justice that administers the scheme.
Yes.
And the appeal system or the review system, is that internal as well?
Well, we're only at the point on this scheme of doing the initial assessment.
Yeah. Perhaps you might come back to us now about this, because it's an internal within the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice has gone through its transformation, which I won't have time to go into today, and perhaps it's for the Justice Committee in any event. But there were serious problems with the Department of Justice. That's why you're going through a transformation, and that's why we've had many reports, Toland and so on. So I'm leaving that aside. And then a Magdalene scheme has been administered under this department. So I really would like to know what has been learned in relation to administering the scheme effectively for people who are extremely vulnerable, what appeal process is there, so they're not resorting to us in desperation, telling us that they haven't been answered. Now, that's not entirely fair to you, because I'm not giving you all the details. I'm simply telling you that's what I'm being told.
I'd be very.
You'd be surprised if that was.
I'd be very surprised if that was the case, and I expect to respect the confidentiality of your communications. But if there is a case you want to draw our attention to,
so just Mr. O'Driscoll, what you're saying is,
maybe then if I could just say, so in relation to the applications that have been received, for example, I already said that there are 9 paid, 2 offers outstanding. 10 have been deemed not eligible. Now, obviously, there has been, therefore, back and forth with the applicants to deem some to be eligible and others not. But in other cases, there is additional information required, and that is what is covered by the data sharing agreement, which we hope that
I understand.
With that in place, that we can now move quickly to
no, I understand all of that, but I suppose I'm coming from a position where I'm looking in a different part of your report, the cost of tribunals, which you've kindly outlined to us, and we're now at almost 70 million for a Morris tribunal, and there's a whole long list of them. Here we're talking about a tiny amount of money in context. So what I'd like to know, I'm not going to dwell on it now, but I certainly would like a note from you. How long is the process taken when somebody applies? What is the appeal? What appeal has been put in place? Is it external to the department? What external people are on it? And so on. We've been through it with Caranua, and I certainly wouldn't like people to go through what those applicants went through in relation to Caranua. I think we should learn. So that's that one. In relation to asylum seekers, and you referred to it in your statement, and you've given us the up-to-date figure, does that include the relocation and resettlement applicants as well? When you give the figure on asylum seekers, you've given a total figure of...
That's refugees.
You've given a total figure of 5,980 and 517 in emergency accommodation, in emergency hotel accommodation.
Yeah.
So it's a figure of 6,497.
You know, that, if you mean, does that include the refugee programme? No, it doesn't.
Okay. So we have 5,980 in how many centres?
38.
38 now. There was
38
more.
centres, yeah.
It's 38. 38 centres now. And they're a mixture of owned by the state with you contract in services and commercially owned. How many are commercially owned?
Most are owned, are commercially owned.
Just not most.
So 31 are commercially owned, 7 are state-owned.
And you don't have enough capacity there?
In the state-owned ones?
No, in all of that?
No, we don't.
So on top of that...
So we are now in a process
of looking at procurement.
Of putting out to tender calls for additional accommodation.
Well, let me just deal with that now. So we have 517 people taking up hotel beds.
That's right.
And we have 5,980 in direct accommodation, either commercially owned premises or state-owned premises. Okay, how many are children? How many are children? What's the breakdown for how long they're there? Because all of this has come up repeatedly. The McMahon report, and I'm going to get to the Controller and Auditor General's chapter, which he did back in 15, I think, as well, and there were recommendations.
There are 88 children.
88 children.
Sorry, that's in the emergency accommodation. There are 88 children.
That's in hotels? In hotels. And in direct accommodation?
Sorry? 957.
957. Okay. Okay. How many are there that have status and can't get out? I'll rephrase that, it sounds terrible. How many are there that have status that can't move on in their lives?
729.
729 who have received status, one way or another.
Yeah.
And can't move out.
So, as I said in my opening statement, well, can't. In my opening statement, I said that we are very actively trying to work on
I'm sure
facilitating them to move on.
I'm sure you are, but there's a major housing crisis.
NGOs, and we're working with local authorities on that.
I understand that now, but all of this was foreseeable, wasn't it? All of this was foreseeable, that people would get status and they would move out, that asylum seekers, and they would have to move on with their lives. So at the moment we have a system clearly in crisis. What's it costing?
The allocation for this year was over 70 million for accommodation, but the cost will be well in excess of that for this year.
Okay, for 18, for 19. So let me just we're looking at the 17 accounts. It was 17
accounts.
It was 67 million or something.
It was 67 million, and then 77 million in 18.
77 million in 18.
But it will be
well in excess.
Well, I think it will be up around 95 to 100 million this year, is my guess at this point.
So 67 million, 77 million, and 95 to 100 million this year. And within that, then, we have children. Within that, we have 729 who have status and shouldn't be there. Okay. So we'll go back to the Chapter 6 of the Controller and Auditor General's procurement and management of contracts for direct provision. And at the time, he talked about it wasn't going out to tender, and you disagreed with him in the sense that you said it was a negotiated procedure. Yeah. If I'm wrong anywhere, please correct me. Yeah. And there was a question about getting value for money. Yeah. And he was saying it should be going to, or he wasn't saying, he was highlighting the fact that it wasn't going to procurement for the private providers. You were going through a process of expressions of interest and so on, and then negotiating an agreement. And he pointed out clearly in that chapter that the conditions or the criteria necessary for the negotiated procedure weren't there. But you still proceeded with the negotiated procedure. Okay. And you took issue with them at the time. I think that was 15. and he made recommendations. What has changed since then? Have you changed your negotiated procedure?
We have, yeah.
You have? When did you change it?
We are now, this year, in the process of putting out a series of regional tenders, and we're in mid-process at the moment in relation to the provision of these facilities all around the country. We're doing it region by region because it is a policy to...
Why did you wait till now? That was 15, and we're now in 19, and now you're going by procurement, which was raised way back by the Controller General's office in...
Obviously, it would take a while in relation to cases where you already had contracts in place. But we did move to tender provisions previously, but we are now rolling it out throughout the country for all additions.
When did you move to tenders previously for direct provision? Yeah,
Mark.
sorry.
Clarify the difference between the different the tender processes. So we have a process for the state-owned centres.
No, I understand all of this. Tell me if I'm wrong. There's a process for the state-owned. You contract. That's done by procurement. You get in companies or people to run the services.
Yes.
Then you have direct provision, which is not done by procurement, and you go by a negotiated agreement. It's not done. And so that was raised back in 15. I've moved on from that, and I'm asking you what changes have been made, and I've been told now you're going to go to procurement.
Well, in 2018, from early 2018, we were working with the Office of Government Procurement in developing the requirements for the new commercially run centres. They were to incorporate the recommendations of the McMahon report, particularly around improvements in respect of services for
I know all of that.
families.
We all know that. We've had it before, and we've read the reports. Honestly, I know the changes. McMahon recommended them. The Ombudsman has reported on it. I'm specifically talking about value for money in terms of how do you ensure this value for money in relation to this, if you're not going by procurement, and if you are now.
Yes, exactly. Yes. We are now. I think this is an important point, though, that we are now, and we're rolling it out throughout the country. Yeah. But obviously, it is a process of change from the old system. In relation to value for money, may I make a remark on that?
Yes, certainly.
Obviously, we are now in a position to start comparing the results of tendering with the results from the original approach of negotiation. And a preliminary conclusion, I don't want to draw a firm conclusion on this yet, is that there isn't a huge saving. Now, it's difficult to judge because we are constantly raising the standards that we require. So the standards under the new tender system are higher than would have been under the old negotiation
Mr O'Driscoll, all of that was identified back in 15 in terms of identifiable indicators so that you could measure. That was all set out in that chapter in 15.
And during that time, as I've already pointed out to you, the numbers were rising rapidly over the last few years.
They didn't rise rapidly. There was a fall in the numbers.
Well, in 2017, certainly there was a significant rise. In 2018, there was a significant rise. So in fairness to the department, look, Deputy, I wasn't there then, but looking at this objectively, the department was trying to cope with those increased numbers. It was certainly conscious of the CNHE's conclusion and did move and has moved to a tender basis now. And has also, in that tender basis, moved to the requirement for higher standards within the centres.
In relation to alternative ways of looking at it, have you looked now at alternative ways of dealing with this so that people can integrate? What preparations to avoid what's happened in various towns, and there have been good towns and other towns that are also good, but there wasn't proper communication. What have you put in place in relation to that?
Well, we have communication systems in place. In every place that a centre is formed, a friend of the centre's organisation is also formed. So, for example, there was controversy in Wicklow. A Friends of the Centre has been established there. In fact, I was told when I visited Mosney that when Mosney was established as a provision centre, there was controversy there, but again a very active Friends of the Provision centre was established and helped relations with the local community. You ask, are we looking at alternatives?
Yes, proactively.
And proactively, yes, we are. But we're doing it with the people who know about these things, so with NGOs and housing associations and so on, to see are there other approaches. We would love to have NGOs and housing associations involved in provision of this kind of accommodation. It would be a really positive development, and we're very open to that.
That's a change, Mr O'Driscoll, and I welcome that. Unfortunately, we're doing that now in the middle of a housing crisis, but that is a welcome change if that's a change in relation to it. There are many more questions I would ask on it, but I'm going to just finish because I'm coming near the end of my time. One is in relation to the forensic science lab, and I'm jumping. It's just the nature of it, and the money saved in relation to the forensic science laboratory. Page 19.
Yeah.
And there was an estimate provision, so I want to just do that and procurement at the beginning. The outturn was much less. There's a savings in relation to it. I understand that the enabling works was with a view to building a new facility, because this is a converted office that's really not fit for purpose. Is that too strong? Or?
No, I actually haven't had an opportunity to visit yet. I'm actually going there next week, but I believe the facilities are not adequate, clearly. Yeah.
They're not?
Adequate.
They're not adequate. And so obviously that was all agreed and the plan put in place, and that plan seems to have gone off the rails, does it? There's an underspill in...
No. Well, the situation in relation to the Forensic Science Lab is that, in fact, there is a tender out for the main building works and for the M&E works.
Just let me just say, on your page, on your note, the construction of the laboratory will get underway during 2018. That didn't happen.
Well, the enabling works, as you yourself have pointed out.
No, the construction of the laboratory, well, let's not play with words now. The construction of the laboratory will get underway. Did the construction...
I think enabling works now, to be fair, are actually part of a whole construction project. So the enabling works have been done, as you correctly said. The tender, we are waiting, or in fact, the tender results may well be in. OPW, obviously, are managing this.
Now, who can answer that, though, in relation to this, the tendering?
Yeah, So there are two tenders, one for the main construction and one for the M&E works. Both of those are out. We will see when they come in what the total cost of the project will be.
Well, I understand there was a tendering process, or expressions of interest process, and nobody showed an interest. No, that's not correct. So when did it start? Sorry, that's great. Again, do you know what you'll do? You'll give us a clarification note in relation to this. And when Mr O'Driscoll, are the enabling works expected to be completed? Have they been completed? Are we now going up?
I think the M&E work, the enabling works, as far as I know, are substantially completed. Say OPW is directly managing the project. In relation to the procurement process for the main building, the tender commenced in January of this year, and the M&E procurement followed in February. So we are there now. In terms, now I have to say to you though, Deputy, out of these tenders will come a bill, and we now have to see, can we pay that bill, whether that can be fitted in within the capital budget. So that also has to be...
Was this one of the projects that was marked as being affected by the Children's Hospital? I can't recall.
To be honest with you, no, there's been no direct impact on the Children's Hospital.
Chair,
the delays.
Just to clarify, was that one of the projects that was identified? No.
The savings. The saving, Deputy, if I could just say, the savings that would occur anyway can of course be recycled into the Children's Hospital. But there's no impact on the development of the forensic science by the Children's Hospital.
So there's no delay, and you're going to give us a note on tendering and when it's likely to be constructed. The final thing is just what I should have started out with, was procurement on the front of your accounts.
Yeah.
A significant number.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Will you take
so for 2017,
it's on page 3 and it's set out 39. 39.
Yeah, 39 supply agreements valued at...
To a value of 6 million plus.
6.6 million.
Yeah.
There is a slight reduction, I can tell you, in 2018 down to 5.9 million. Why they arose...
How many projects? Sorry, how many projects in 18 for the 5.9 million?
Sorry?
How many? 39 arrangements for 17.
39 indeed.
Yeah, and how many for 18 then? There's a slight reduction.
33.
33, thanks. Yeah. Just go ahead through that for me, because I just marked...
Okay, so of the 39, 15 related to sole supplier contracts.
Yeah.
These are mainly things related to forensic science, in fact, and information ICT, which is a normal issue with those kind of contracts. 2 were specialists, but they were very small. They only amounted to 74,000, so it's not a significant factor here. So the main other element were 22 contract extensions, and that amounted to 4.3 million. My understanding is that these arose for a variety of reasons. One was legal delays in relation to putting contracts in place. Another was delays in putting in place, particularly the government cloud arrangement, and some delays in putting in place OGP frameworks. As the OGP frameworks have rolled out, most government departments are gradually converting over to the use of OGP frameworks, but obviously there was some delay in the rollout. So the progress in 2018 is significantly due to the availability of OGP contracts, of contracts under the OGP framework, I should say, to be precise.
So it's gone down to 5.9 million.
For 2018,
For 2018, it's not hugely gone down.
It's not hugely, but it's, we're going in the right direction, and we've established a specialist procurement unit within the department, and between that and the OGP frameworks, I would be hopeful about the future. Future direction.
So, all right. All right. Thanks, Chair.
I'm reluctant to make firm promises.
Thank you.
Just to confirm, following on from that, in relation to the forensic laboratory, to send us detail, you said the main contract and the M&E contract went out to tender in January, February. When is that process expected to be completed, the contractor appointed? When is he expected on site and the completion date? So give us, you can send it to us by note if you don't have it. You know, there's
what we will do is, what I will do on that, if I may, Chairman, is I will discuss it with the OPW and give you a note, right? But I want to repeat the point I made. We make estimate provisions for all of these large capital projects. We now will see what the actual tender shows. And we are working within, as you may know now, fixed multi-year capital envelopes. So we now have to try and fit that within that multi-year capital envelope.
So what you're saying is there's no absolute final decision to proceed?
Well, until, I mean, the position is, of course, until you sign a contract, you're not there. So these are necessary steps for us. Of course, we're fully committed to the project. I've already said that the existing facilities for forensic science are clearly inadequate, and it is a high priority. But I am required, as the accounting officer, and the CNHE would confirm this, to manage the budget, and we have to.
Well, give us a note to include that caveat.
We will absolutely do that.
Obviously. And next, Deputy Farrell was scheduled for the next speaker, but he's not here just at the moment. So, Deputy MacSharry, we're into 10-minute slots.
Thanks very much, Chair, and I'll indicate for a second round if I can. I don't have many questions specific to the vote we're considering this morning, so I will be going a little bit off the reservation after my first initial questions. And just as with Deputy Connolly, to congratulate the Department on a clear audit opinion on their audit, and to continued good wishes to the new team at the helm of the Department of Justice. Just on, and I did say just in private that I didn't have a question relevant to the immigration side, but I do have one, and just to put on record first, totally in favour of us playing our global part in terms of the acceptance and welcoming of refugees, and they are very welcome. But in terms of the locating of them, and I'm conscious that I know that there would have been the procurement of locations, I think in Moville and Donegal and in Ruski County Roscommon to prepare them. And I'm just conscious, it would appear to me, it would seem to me just logically that locations larger in population, larger towns and cities might be better placed to seamlessly integrate and welcome different nationalities. So is there demographic analysis done to inform the decision of locating, kind of a large number of refugees, which again I emphasise are very, very welcome, in a small location like Ruski, or in a relatively small location like Moville, as opposed to a Letterkenny or a Roscommon or a Sligo or an Athlone or a Dublin?
Yeah, it's a very fair question, Deputy. Looking at the tenders we're doing at the moment, as I said earlier on, they're done on a regional basis. Right, so we would run a tender for a segment of the country, say 2 or 3 counties. We would then have to see who comes forward in those counties with an offer.
Our hands are kind of tied behind our back then because of tendering. Is that the case?
Well, I wouldn't put it that strongly, but yes, we have to respond then to what is tendered.
And can I ask if the department might consider what options are available? Because I think that methodology is flawed, and I think it probably feeds what can be sometimes accused of racism, but I don't believe it to be racism, where smaller locations are anticipating that maybe what was a former hotel and can contribute to their recovery in terms of tourism in the future or other kind of larger locations, that we need to kind of prioritise where the people we're welcoming are going to have the maximum ease, while at the same time not upsetting the demographic balance of a particular location, if small. And I know you don't know the answer today, but if you could take that on board. I want to divert to other matters, and I know the clerk will be concerned about this, but it's in the interest of using our time most efficiently, because you're not in a position, or are we in a position, to have you in as regularly as all of us might like. So, in relation to the prison service, and I just want to put a couple of quick things on record from my own point of view, because following our meeting of the 17th, it was accused on the public airways by the Prison Officers Association of seeking to shut down the mess committees. And also, I'm informed that briefings are being held by the POA in prisons throughout the country, where members are being told not to communicate with TDs, and that I in particular was seeking to shut down mess committees. So just to put on record that that is totally incorrect, that there was any move to shut down facilities available to hard-working prison officers for hot meals. I'd be to the fore in opposing same, but that is not to confuse my wish for the appropriate procedures to be in place, and I thought it peculiar that the Prison Officers Association would take to the national airwaves or provide briefing in this way, when in the same meeting I was highlighting things of critical importance, such as sexual harassment, such as career blocking, such as illegal surveillance of their members, but nevertheless that's what they chose to do. So just to say, I'm on the side of the ordinary prison officer, but I'm also on the side, in line with our constitutional responsibility in here, of appropriate procedures and protections for staff and so on. As a result of the meeting on the 17th in relation to the prison service, subsequent research, I am concerned, Secretary-General, that there may be a parallel investigative, judicial and enforcement system in operation across and within individual prisons when it comes to alleged wrongdoing by prison staff. So I therefore have a number of questions to put to you, and I fully appreciate that you don't have the IPS team along with you today, and I accept fully that you may not be in a position to answer questions, and if you're not, we'll move on and perhaps you'll revert to us either in writing, which would be preferable. First of all, when will the report on the Section 31(2) Prisons Act 2007 preliminary investigation carried out by the Inspector of Prison be published?
We've received the report. As is appropriate, we're examining it. It has been sent to the Attorney General for examination. It will then go to the Minister when we have the AG's comments and so on. So we are required, or the Minister rather, is required to lay it before both houses of the Oireachtas and publish it. So it will follow very quickly from that. I can't give you an exact date, but it will not be...
Any ballpark, a month, 2 months, the next session?
It's in that sort of ballpark, but I don't want to give you a definite...
Right, sometime between now and kind of October then. Okay, well look, just to say from the committee's perspective, the sooner the better in that regard. In your follow-up response to our meeting, the last issues raised at our meeting of the 17th of January, in relation to surveillance, you confirmed the use of firms for approximately 18,000 in one case and 10,500 respectively in another, but went on to say, quote, it's not possible from the information available to determine if these payments relate to surveillance of prison staff, end quote. You further said that you had, quote, sent the invoices to the Inspector of Prisons, presumably to assist with her investigation. Why would you not have asked the surveillance companies in question to inform your answer to us? Or why would you not have contacted the head of operations of the IPS, who I understand will be the line authority for the approval of such expenditure?
Okay, Deputy, you're now getting into the substance of the Inspector of Prisons report. In effect, she is looking at all of these matters, and I really would not be comfortable going into that. And that is besides the point that we're here on the Justice and Equality.
No, and I did
outline
at the beginning that I appreciate that, but I'm trying to use all of our time efficiently.
I accept that, and I'm not going to hide behind that. But you're going into now issues that are, being dealt with, have been dealt with by the Inspector of Prisons in her report, and I really have to allow that process to play out.
Okay. Irrespective of her report, these questions do arise, so I would ask you to note them and revert to us. Presumably you're suggesting that for legal reasons you can't go there at the moment. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I'm not going to, again, I'm not hiding behind legal advice or anything else. But the Inspector of Prisons was asked by the Minister to undertake a process of writing a report. That report is now under consideration by the Attorney-General and the Department staff, and will go to the Minister shortly. That process has to play out.
All right, so you're saying that these matters may have direct relevance to her report, so you can't not in a position to answer that. Okay. At a previous meeting, between your last meeting with us and here, I alluded to the fact that documentation arrived anonymously to me here at Leinster House some weeks ago. I said I would seek legal advice in relation to same, and so I have. The contents of this documentation are a matter of huge concern to me. I don't want the clerk panicking at this stage. Nobody's going to be named here, but I do want to make a point, and I've taken legal advice about what I'm about to say. They appear to be a list of profiles of people who may have been and may still be serving prison officers or contractors. It includes what I would describe as personal detailed information and allegations of alleged wrongdoing. It gives detailed accounts of movements of a person or persons in areas outside a prison environment with date, times, addresses and vehicle registration numbers. The provenance of this information, according to these documents, if genuine, would implicate the operational support group of the prison service in surveillance and intelligence gathering outside the prison environment. Because of the nature and the contents of these documents, which are here, I will today forward a copy to each of the Garda Commissioner and the Data Protection Commissioner as the relevant authorities. And naturally, this is a matter of huge concern to me, as I assume it is to you. Can I ask, just moving on from that, are the Department, and Chairman, you stop me whenever my time is up because I want to come in for a second round, are the Department or the IPS, to your knowledge, aware of an instance of a prison service employee with responsibility for stores in any of our prisons, whom, it is alleged, was selling prison stores items on the internet? Can you confirm this person, whether this person was simply allowed to resign as opposed to being subjected to the appropriate Garda investigation, prosecution, penalties and loss recovery to the state? And if the Department are not aware of such an instance, can you make all necessary inquiries?
Thank you, Deputy. I appreciate that you're clearly, as you said in your introduction, putting certain things on the record. You want to do that here today. I'm not in a position here today to talk in detail about prisons issues. That's not the subject matter of today's meetings.
Okay, that's fine.
But let me say this. You have indicated that you have significant information about what you regard as significant wrongdoing. And if I understand correctly, you have said that you were reporting that to the Gardaí, which is the appropriate thing to do.
No, that was a previous issue to do with surveillance. This is a separate question.
Well, in both cases, it would be what you're outlining is serious wrongdoing, and both should be reported to the Gardaí, I would suggest. That's I don't think that's extraordinary advice. Yeah. But I'm not in a position, clearly not in a position to talk about
could, which is a reasonable question. Could, if the reasonable question is the accounting officer, because all of these matters have financial implications, could the Department make the appropriate inquiries?
Deputy, are you in a position, you're talking, we're all at a disadvantage. You have a document which we have...
No, sorry. I alluded to documents that were to do with surveillance. These are other questions arising out of research.
Yeah, and in relation to documents you have which relates to the security... That's
the surveillance matter, which is the last question, not this one.
The earlier question. I just want to be satisfied. And has that been referred to the Garda Síochána, that security document? Or that's subject to the...
What are you asking, Chair, now, because it's not clear?
I just want to be clear. If there's documentation referred to here and none of us have seen it, is it being forwarded to the Garda Síochána?
Oh, sorry, the only documentation being referred to, okay, apart from my own personal private research, is from the previous question.
Yeah.
And I've outlined and read into the record what I'm going to do, and that's going to be sent to the Garda Commissioner today. The question I'm currently on is not related to that documentation
Next issue, yeah.
at all.
That's
totally different.
Item.
I've asked, has there been an instance where somebody responsible for stores in the prison service was selling items on the internet from those stores for their personal gain, and was this person allowed to retire or resign without the appropriate Garda investigation? And if the answer is I'm not aware of that, I'm simply asking, will the department carry out the necessary make the necessary inquiries? And I have a number of questions along these lines.
Okay.
So when my time is up, there's no problem. I'll stop and I'll come in the next time. Okay? So I'm asking you, while I appreciate you were saying nothing to do, you didn't say nothing to do with me, but you were saying to me, go to the Guards if you have information. I'm going to the Secretary General of the Department, which I think is perfectly reasonable to ask you to inquire.
My question, Deputy, is have you documentation you can give to Mr O'Driscoll to assist him in the inquiries you're asking him to do?
I'd have to take legal advice on that.
Okay.
So I'm asking and wording questions in the way that I can to assist the Secretary General in what I hope might be inquiries that he will make.
Okay.
Our Department of the IPS aware of an instance or instances of any prison staff who, in parallel and outside their prison career, run a private enterprise and supplement the running of this enterprise from prison stores? And if not, can the Department make the necessary inquiries? I assume the answer may be the same.
Deputy, clearly, if anything you send in to us, we will seek the comments of the prison service. But I would repeat...
Well, I suppose just clearly... go on, sorry.
I would repeat the point I make, though, that if you have information that indicates wrongdoing, it is appropriate to report that to the Gardaí also.
Yeah.
But if you send queries to us, we will, of course, seek answers to those queries from the
we're putting them on the record now, so
that's fine. Yeah.
That constitutes that.
You can take it. It's on the record. You've been asked.
Work or products made within prison workshops. We obviously have woodworking shops and metalworking shops and so on in prison service. What is the situation with products made in there? Are they sold? What's the situation? If they're sold, what are the protocols around that? To whom? Where do the funds, or where are the funds lodged? Following on from that, are the Department or the Prison Service aware of any prison staff who have availed of prison workshop materials, products produced, and prison staff expertise and manpower paid for by the state to make improvements to their personal, family or holiday homes? And if inquiries can be made about that. In our meeting of January 17th, I inquired about agency nurses, and Mr Cullinane said that there was significantly less agency nurses following a recruitment drive. I'm not sure this is to be true, and I would ask that the Department would inquire, is it not the case that there are still a substantial amount of agency nurses through the agency CPL? In our meeting of January 17th, the number of instances of sexual harassment that have occurred was raised in your letter following the meeting.
But I'm going to say to Deputy MacSharry.
Sure.
If I could, Chair, because I'm a little uncomfortable with the line of questioning and I don't want to stop Deputy MacSharry, but there are a number of serious allegations, in my opinion, being put on the public record without any verification of them. And if that is what Deputy MacSharry wants to do, I think it should be made clear that he's doing that in an individual capacity, and it's not being put on the record. This is not the committee putting this on the record, just to be very clear. Because
I accept what Deputy O'Brien is saying, and my view at this point, and we'll conclude when the Deputy is completed, we'll make a decision. But where I sit as Chairman, chairing a meeting, if allegations of criminality have been made here, and I'm chairing this meeting, I will be directing as Chairman of the committee that this committee sends those to the Garda Síochána directly, because
the committee doesn't have that information. It's one individual on the committee has it.
I'm saying send I will be proposing, not only are the questions directed at Mr O'Driscoll to make inquiries, I'm the Chairman of the committee, that request is coming through me to yourself. I'm proposing that, and I'll seek assistance from the committee,
given the nature of what is being said, I would be recommending, as chairman, I can't ignore what's being said. If there's a suggestion of criminality made at a meeting that I am chairing, I have a duty to send the transcript of what's been said for the Garda Síochána to take it up with whoever may have information in relation. I can't ignore that this being said, and I'm sure the deputy will understand what you say. I will have to send the transcript. I would be suggesting I will be sending the transcript of what's been said here to the Garda Commissioner, because I think I can't have this said at the PAC. If there's substance, I can't stop it. But if it's said at the PAC in the public record, I have a duty as chairman. Given that there's a suggestion of criminality here, I have a duty as chairman to send that transcript to the Garda Commissioner for his action after it. So, just so we all understand, and Mr. Driscoll will consider doing the same, or that's up to me. But I know what I have to do as chairman. But complete what you're saying, and the transcript is on the record. Will be sent on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is my time up? Because I don't need anybody into anybody's time.
I'm checking my 10:40, 57. Yeah, we're done for the moment, but you're down to come back in.
Yeah, I'll come back in then.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm saying formally, as chairman, what has been said here, this transcript, as soon as it's available, I'm insisting it be sent to the Garda Commissioner.
That's fine. I've taken my own legal advice, okay?
Yeah.
I haven't mentioned any names, nobody's identifiable or anything like that by anything I have said.
Yeah.
But I'm just very careful. I also have a responsibility to do the best job I can here. All of these issues have financial implications for the state, and that's why I'm using the opportunity here today to put them on record. And it would be my I would be very grateful, in fact, if that the Gardaí would take an interest in the transcript of today's meeting. But I think also the Department of Justice, and that's why I'm asking the questions and saying, will you make the necessary inquiries? And I fully appreciate and don't want to be taking any sort of an adversarial position with the Secretary General in regard to this matter. But I think that prudence demands that these matters be looked into, you know, the reasonable questions.
All I'm saying, for the Secretary General's and the Deputy's own benefit, regardless of what you do, I'm saying as chairman, they've been made in a meeting that I'm chairing. I am sending this transcript to the Garda Commissioner. Myself, you're free to do what you choose, but I know what I'm doing as chairman from my point of view. Now, we're moving on to the next speaker. Deputy Murphy had to leave for a moment, and I'll sort her in as soon as she comes back. So Deputy Cassells is the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman, and welcome to the Secretary General and all of the fellow witnesses. 5,980 in accommodation centres, 517 in hotels, so a total of 6,497. They were the figures that you had. I think you said they've probably increased. The growth figures outlined in your opening statement are significant. Now, you said in your opening statement that Ireland has committed to receiving 4,000 persons under the Refugee Protection Programme. Can I ask how many are anticipated this year in 2019?
Well, we have so far settled 2,374, or admitted to Ireland 2,374 under those programmes. Okay. And there is, if you like, commitments around another approximately 1,300, which would leave a gap, if you like, of about 300 to get to the 4,000. In principle, it is possible that all of them could arrive in 2019, but possibly spilling into 2020, realistically.
I ask in the context of, you spoke about procurement and the processes and the challenges that faces for you. In that context, have you, through your engagement, identified properties that would allow you to take that amount of people this year?
Yes, the refugee we are under pressure on all fronts. The refugee programme maybe poses something less of a problem in the sense that we can at least anticipate who is arriving and when they're arriving, right? Because it's done through refugee programmes with a variety of UN and other bodies. So we will know that, say, 40 people are arriving. We will know their configuration in terms of family configuration, and we can make sure appropriate housing is available. That's quite different from the asylum seeker situation, where somebody just turns up in Dublin Airport or in its office in Burke.
Okay.
And we have no forewarning, and the person has to be housed that night.
Okay.
So they're quite different challenges. I'm not saying that the refugee programme is easy to manage. It's not, but it doesn't pose the same challenges in terms of immediacy of response that the asylum seeker one does.
Okay. In terms of whether it be refugee or asylum seekers, in terms of the tendering process that you spoke of, I suppose the challenges that face because it's coming in reverse to you. When you get those expressions of interest from those said properties or so forth, and you spoke about the local authorities and the communication process and working with them, and you spoke about in your opening statement about the pressures in your accommodation system, which is probably putting it mildly, the challenges and the difficulty it's experienced in different places that have been mentioned. Can I ask, do you work with the local authority in terms of, if you've got an expression of interest, then in terms of the suitability, the potential sensitivities, in order to avoid the incidents that have been happening?
Yes, we do, Deputy. There's a great deal of engagement when a centre is identified or is offered. There is engagement with local authorities and also with health services and so on. I might ask my colleague Mark Wilson just to expand on that a little bit.
And just before that happens, because that is to try and actually speak around this issue, or speak to the point more particularly. We've seen in these sections of the community, and I only say sections because it's not reflective of all of the community, things being cited such as medical issues, education, childcare, as the supposed reasons for non-suitability. So I'm asking the question specifically in terms of, say, your engagement with the CEO in Roscommon, or the Director of Housing in that area, or indeed the Local Government Managers Association nationwide, who would have a separate subsection to say, yes, they would fit into the suitability criteria, and that you were able to actually come out front and centre before these protests happen in the first instance, and that, I would be interested in that.
Leave Mark go first.
Yeah, in relation to the procurement process, the tenders are considered and a framework is put in place, and when that tender process is started for a given region, we inform the CEOs of the various local authorities that the procurement is going on in their region. Yeah. And the first of those frameworks is being formed at the moment, and we have a committee being pulled together that's meeting for the first time next week, which will include the representative from the LGMA, HSE, Department of Education, DESP, to coordinate how, when the information can be provided at the earliest point, the relevant services then can be engaged to look at the issues and look at the communication with communities and with relevant service providers around health and education. Okay.
So there is a positive engagement by the CEOs of the local authority in that respect?
We have met with the CCMA in respect of the work of RIA in the last 2 months, particularly in respect of those with status. But within that forum, we did discuss the challenges of the procurement model and how to improve communication with the local authorities.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Driscoll, you clarified earlier to Deputy Connolly that there are 38 centres in the country, 31 commercially owned, 7 state, for the 5,918 direct accommodation. The cost last year was 77 million and potentially rising to 100 million this year. In terms of the split for the cost of the 38 centres, and then you had the additional 517 persons in hotel accommodation. So could you tell me the cost of the 38 centres for direct accommodation, and then the cost, the headline figure for the 2018 for the 500 for the hotel accommodation cost?
Okay, so the kind of headline figure here, the latest figure, is about €38 per person in the accommodation centres. €38 per person per day in the accommodation centres. In 2017, I think it was about 35. In relation to the hotel accommodation, it's difficult to give you a figure because obviously these are hotel rates.
But just what was the cumulative figure, say, for whatever accounts, whether it be 2017 or 2018?
The cumulative figure was for 2018 was 890,000 for the emergency accommodation.
890,000 for the 517 persons.
Well, that's the current number of persons, I think. Sorry, Mark, do you want to? add to that?
Just to clarify that we began using emergency accommodation in September and expected to use a small amount of that accommodation.
September 2018.
2018. And we expected to use that for a short period with both the proposed centres in Moville and Ruski due to open.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the number, the centres did not progress and the numbers increased. So we had about 250 by year end, and that number has increased up to the current 517.
Okay, so the figure that was quoted there of 850,000 was only for the period September to Christmas 2018.
September to Christmas, and the costs in terms of the year to date are 3.4 million.
So 3.4 million until, does that include the September to Christmas period, or is that January to March?
That is the first quarter, January to March.
It's 3.4 million in the hotels?
Yes.
For 517 people.
That's correct.
Okay, so 517 people currently in accommodation since January, 3.4 million. Considering that you believe that to be only a short-term process prior to Christmas because you had anticipated housing people in direct accommodation, were those figures anticipated? Are they scheduled into your costs? Because obviously if that's the first quarter, you know, we're talking around 12, 13, 14 million potentially more for a full year's accommodation in hotels.
You know, as I was saying earlier on, Deputy, it is quite clear that we will well exceed the budget that was foreseen for the whole year. We're currently, as I say, working on a figure of 95 to 100 million, but you know, it's early in the year. We don't. I think it's really important to understand the point I made earlier about the asylum system. Literally, people turn up at the airport or at the front door of Burke, and we have to cope with it. It's a very challenging situation at the best of times, but obviously in the context of the housing
more challenging as well.
The housing situation of the country and rising numbers, it is particularly challenging.
How many hotels are currently on the books for the department?
It's
16.
16. In terms then of going back to the earlier comments in terms of identified properties, and we see the challenge that you are facing, is it a situation that the hotel, you said in your comments, Mr. Wilson, is it, sorry? Yeah, that the hotel aspect was a short-term solution, and that was in September. And we've already seen the numbers growing, and because of the challenges you face, the potential for it to become, unfortunately, this is my fear, a long-term solution. So already from January to March is 3.4 million. You've got, as the Secretary-General Wright said, a housing crisis. In terms of identifying suitable accommodation, are we to see the hotel aspect become like the version of HAP for housing, and suddenly this spirals out of control? That would be my fear, that we have a situation because of the perfect storm of a housing crisis, and then compounded by the challenges that you are facing in terms of identifying suitable properties, that now hotels are becoming the solution for you because, as you said, people presenting, and that in the first quarter alone it's cost 3 million. God knows what could that rise to at the end of the year, and that to face and to meet the challenges that you have on a daily basis, that it becomes just the option for you that you are now using hotels. One, is that a correct assessment, an acceptable fear that you have? And two, what is the long-term strategy to try and nip that in the bud so that we don't have a situation where, a bit like HAP becomes the crutch for the housing solution, hotels become the crutch for your department? Yeah, look, I can be very, and you've articulated very clearly some of the real challenges facing us. We don't want to be using emergency accommodation in hotels at all. Like, we don't want to be in that business. That's not what we want to do. So the tenders that the regional tenders that we have out at the moment for accommodation solutions, hopefully will give us, increased capacity to deal with the increased numbers that we're facing. We do, in answering Deputy Connolly, I also did say earlier that we have to be, and indeed I made the point in my opening remarks, that we have to be very open also to other solutions, completely different solutions in my view. And that includes, as I said, engagement with NGOs, housing associations and so on, as to what they might be able to offer, and working with them.
We also have this problem. I mean, the number of people in hotel accommodation is over 500. The number of people with status in our system is over 700. So if you just do the simple mathematics, if we were able to get people with status to move on into the normal housing situation, we wouldn't be in the hotel business.
Well, I'm going to come to that as well.
That is the other side of the coin here.
Okay. In terms of the 38 properties, could you tell me the hierarchy of properties in terms of size? So say the top 3, 1, 2, 3, in terms of their capacity, and also is there a limit on the size of the centre so that it does not exceed X amount?
I'll pass that one to
Mark. Okay.
Mr. Wilson, if I may, if he has those figures to hand.
Yeah, well, certainly the largest centre that we have is Mosney, where we have
with a capacity of?
For direct provision for re-accommodation is 600. The Knocklashin Centre in Clare has an accommodation capacity of 250 and Kinsale Road 299. We also have 250 bed capacity in the Towers in Clondalkin, and the last would be the Athlone Centre, where we have 300.
Okay. Would you have an average figure for the, if you don't, it doesn't matter, but for the 38 centres, would you have an average figure of capacity? Because obviously Mosney skews the figures. Would you have an average?
I wouldn't have an average, but certainly there are very few of our centres under the size of 60 to 80.
60, okay.
So the majority are in the 100 to 200 size.
Okay, so you mentioned Mosney there, obviously hits the top, it's well above average. Can you tell me, just in terms of the year Mosney was acquired and opened, it is a significant campus in size. Can you just tell me, remind me again what year that was?
Now, I don't have that with me, but my understanding is it was in the early days of direct provision, starting at around 2000.
Yeah.
From my previous report, it's December 2000.
December 2000. Would the policy be today, in terms of, and the Secretary-General mentioned the pressures that you're under, to replicate the size that Mosney offers you, or what would be the policy in that respect? Because obviously there's been a lot of kind of human rights issues expressed in terms of Mosney as well.
The capacity of any individual centre would be based on the building itself.
Okay, so there's not a policy in terms of saying you would be open to any proposals put forward. You wouldn't be saying no, 600 is actually too much. You wouldn't be, because there, as I said, there have been concerns expressed previously in terms of the human rights issues pertaining to Mosney.
There has not been a need to consider that.
Can I just come in here? The reference to that there are human rights issues.
Okay, well, maybe I'll phrase that a different way.
Please.
That's okay. That's fine, Mr. Secretary. I'll phrase it a different way. I'm going to get down into that in terms of, well, it comes down to in terms of what you interpret, in terms of whether people should be able to have washing facilities, cooking facilities, the security of their doors, things like that, which we raised previously and were expressed previously during previous public accounts in their own area as opposed to a central area. So we'll raise that again, and that's been extensive. I come from Meath, so it's been extensively covered in respect of local media and so forth as well. When it opened as a centre, can I ask, what was the initial duration for the lifetime of that centre in terms of the lease that was agreed with Mr McCluskey, and also the actual policy for it as a centre in terms of the model of accommodation long term?
I'm not sure if my colleagues would have those, but Deputy, there's a couple of points I do need to make now. First of all, you're asking about commercial arrangements with one particular supplier, and
well, it's the biggest one.
I looked to the chairman on that. Is that really appropriate? But in any case, let me make.
Okay, sorry, Chairman. I'll just clarify, because I don't want people to be misinterpreting. The cost of hiring that facility up until I think December 2016 CNAG was 101 million to the state. Yeah. So I think any one provider that has received 101 million euro in state funding for one centre and houses 600 people, I think I'm within my rights to ask about that particular centre. I feel, Chairman, I am.
Okay. And I'm just saying, I'm not sure we have that level of commercial detail available to us right here now. But look, in relation to the facilities at Mosney, and I'm completely new to this as well, so I'm casting a fresh eye on it. You know, I only joined the department 6 months ago. I visited Mosney, though, and the facilities there for families and so on are, of course, not the kind of facilities you would want people living in long term, and I'll come back to that point.
I'll accept that there was refurbishment. I will accept that there was refurbishment done. I'm saying previously when we discussed it here, there wasn't.
There's significant refurbishment done, and the facilities there are very, very good, it seemed to me, particularly around education, health, the fact that people have their individual doors, can do their own cooking. We are moved to a situation where already more than 50% of people in accommodation centres can do their own cooking, but we're trying to move to a situation where we get to everybody is in that position, because this has rightly been a very sensitive issue. People want to have that independence of action. Can I just make a point, though? What is acceptable maybe for accommodation for somebody for a short time is different from what is acceptable for somebody for accommodation for a long time. So there's actually a number of different issues intersecting here. One is the standards in the facilities themselves, which, as has already been pointed out, are being substantially enhanced. And under the new tender arrangements, the standards are higher again, and all involve cooking facilities and so on. But secondly, there is the whole speed of process for applications. So for going through the International Protection Office, the Appeals Tribunal and so on. So we're also trying to address that. In other words, trying to get a faster movement through the system so people do not end up staying in the facilities for a long time. And there's been a very significant improvement in that in recent years. But there's a lot more to be done. Where we want to get to is where people spend a relatively short time, periods of months rather than years, in these facilities, while they're waiting for first decision and appeal, perhaps to the tribunal. The next step beyond that is where people choose to take judicial reviews, and that's more difficult to predict. But we definitely want a situation where people are not in these facilities long term. I'm simply making the point that a facility that you would consider acceptable for a short-term period is different from a facility that you would want people to be in long term. And we completely understand and accept that, and that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I did say I accepted there had been refurbishment there, and I think it was fair to make the point that that was after significant media coverage in respect of that and the conditions there as well. And so I accept what has been done, but I said I previously raised here as well that there had been what would be considered subhuman conditions there as well. And the Ombudsman had previously raised as well, Peter Tyndall had previously raised as well, in terms of the point system that exists in terms of the purchasing of food for families, for babies, in terms of the points of the cost of baby foods and what families would need for the raising of children. That had been previously raised by the Ombudsman as well. That's not a political charge here. That was raised by the Ombudsman in respect as well. So I think there are fair points to make for the considered amount of money being spent by the state funds in the hiring of this centre. Can I ask, of the 729 who you target?
We're on the last question. You'll be able to get in the second time if you want.
Okay. I just want to see which question I want to ask in terms of wrap up there on this. Okay, I'll just ask in terms of the 729 then that you said are awaiting status. How many of those would be at that particular centre? Or?
I have a figure of 187.
187 of the total population of 600 at that particular?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks for the moment, Chair.
Okay, and Mr. Driscoll, seeing as you mentioned the issue of length of time in the various centres, we're going to ask you to send us a schedule of, I hate to use the word, but tell us how many people are in the system less than 12 months, between 1 and 2, between 2 and 3, 3 and 4. What would be the longest period, as I speak today, that people are currently in your system? Would you have anyone there beyond 6 or 7 years? What would be the longest?
I can't say there's nobody beyond 6 or 7 years, but if there are, they're in tiny numbers. Sorry, I have it here now.
We'll call that out to it, but we'll ask you to circulate that as well. So just
actually, there's a very simple table here that I'll circulate here.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, can it be passed on to the Secretariat, and we'll circulate it during the course of the meeting. If you're happy There's nothing confidential in that. If there is, just read it out, the key figures. You said it's simple.
No, it's actually it's a detailed table by.
It's a detailed.
Let me.
Okay.
Oh no, look, we will pass it on.
Just give us the figures. Yeah, you're happy to. So we'll ask our own staff and we'll circulate that to members shortly. So, and people can refer to us as meeting progresses. Next speaker is Deputy Bryan and then Deputy Cullinane.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just look at Mosney? Mosney is not included in the accommodation figures, though, is it?
Oh, it is, yes.
It is, because there's a note here saying that it will not be included in the accommodation centres only.
Sorry, Mosney.
So maybe you can just.
Mosney, if I, and again, because some of my colleagues here are much more expert than I, they should feel free to correct me. Mosney is unusual in being both an accommodations centre for asylum seekers, what's known as a direct provision centre, but it's also an EROC, a place that we put refugees for the initial period of adjustment. When they arrive first, they go into a centre and they move on within a period of months into permanent housing. So Mosney has both. Maybe that's what's being referred to, is it?
Yes, as I say, the re-accommodation is 600 persons, but it has an EROC function separately to that, where it has 200 persons.
Okay, so there's 800 in total. Okay. There's a number of centres which recently closed. Could you give us some detail on why they closed? Was it just the contracts were up, or were they not suitable? I can name the centres if you want. There was the centre in Dublin 2, which had a capacity of 33. It closed in 2017. There was another one in Limerick with a capacity of 90, which closed in 2017. There was one again in Dublin 2 with a capacity of 110, which closed in February last year. Clare, 115. So, is there a reason why they closed? Was just the contracts are up, or?
Again, if I can, in answering your question, in respect of properties in Dublin, there have been occasions where the contractor has decided to use the premises for other purposes. And there has been, at least on one occasion, a decision made by RIA due to concerns around fire safety that we would not continue using a particular premises. So at times it can be in respect of our decision, and at times the contractor chooses to use the building for something else.
And in case where the contractor decides to use the building for other purposes, would they have to wait till the end of the lease period, or can they break the lease?
The contracts would have a break clause in them for either ourselves or the contractor. Under the current tender process, that's a 12-week period. So in each of these cases, there may have been different arrangements in place, but it may well have been that the contract came to an end and the contract simply was not renewed. That's the more likely scenario.
Okay.
It may be relevant, Deputy, just to add that in the period from September 2017 to December 2018, a number of new locations also opened with a total capacity of 880. So as some fall out, others come in.
Yeah. No, and I accept that there has been a number of centres have opened as well. In relation to self-catering centres, though, it's my understanding that no new self-catering centres have opened, and I stand to be corrected in that. And we have seen a closure of a self-catering centre in February of last year.
We've, as I said earlier, we have moved to a position where over 50% of people can cook for themselves. So that is a steady advance. And we hope that by the end of the year or thereabouts to have virtually everybody in a position where they actually cook for themselves. So this involves existing centres converting their facilities. Obviously that's a challenge for some of them. But all of the new centres coming in under the tenders would have that facility. So by the end of the year or thereabouts, we hope to be in a position where virtually all have that capacity. Mark, maybe
I might just clarify that all commercially operated centres will have a requirement under the new tender to have self-catering. The state-operated centres, we're working progressively with the OPW to put in place those facilities.
Okay. And again, in relation to the capacity, it's a policy that there would be a 10% buffer between capacity and occupancy. And it's my understanding from the figures you presented to us, not one of our centres are meeting that criteria at the moment. In fact, some areas are operating at 100% capacity, and the lowest capacity I could find was actually in my own area, the HSE Southern area, 94%.
I think the overall average is about 97%, is that right, capacity?
97%, yeah.
But I think, obviously, too, you've got to remember that capacity is one thing in terms of number of beds, but it's not that simple because, of course, families arrive with particular configurations and they have to be accommodated. So getting to 100% capacity is, in fact, quite difficult in a centre. But nevertheless, as we expand the number of centres under the tender, hopefully we can reduce this pressure somewhat. That's the objective of the exercise.
But I would presume the objective is not to reach the 100% capacity either, because you would have to have a certain amount
absolutely
for emergencies, particularly health emergencies or fire safety emergencies. So
absolutely.
The target is in effect 90%, to be operating at 90% capacity, and we're currently operating at 97%. So the new centres that we're hoping to bring on stream, will that bring down that percentage, or is that target likely to remain, or sorry, is the actual figure likely to remain in excess of the 90%?
So we would definitely hope it will bring down a percentage, but I go back to my earlier point, Deputy. We have to respond to the number of people who simply turn up and claim asylum, and we don't have an accurate way of predicting that. It does tend to come in the flows tend to change over time. But the objective absolutely is to get down to a position where we have spare capacity, because that's what you would need to cope with a situation where you have an unpredictable demand.
Two other questions on this particular area. When we talk about where we should locate centres, is there any criteria there that looks at the overall population and the percentages of population? Because I know in the report that you provided to the committee, the monthly report from October, it does make reference to how many centres are in each particular location and what the occupancy and the residency of that centre is as a percentage of the overall population. And I'm just wondering, is there a criteria there that says we shouldn't exceed a certain percentage, or is this just for information purposes?
It's a little bit both, Deputy. We use it for management purposes, so we do track it, which is sensible for the reasons that you suggest. But at the same time, we have to balance that against the fact that we have to respond to what comes in on a tender. So we try to balance these two factors as best we can. It's not entirely directly answering your question, but can I also say that in the engagement with the City and County Managers Association around the housing of people long-term when they do achieve status, an allocation system is being developed with them that does reflect population densities and so on. So in terms of the long-term housing of people, the answer to your question is, I think, yes. In terms of the short-term, we do track it, but we have to also respond to the fact that to whatever is tendered to us.
Okay. Can I ask, just in relation to management of the centres, one of the regular complaints I would receive in relation to the management of the centres is if somebody has a particular grievance or complaint against the management, they have to go through a particular process before they can actually access the Ombudsman. And it's my understanding that the first step in that process is actually to forward the complaint to the agency or the private company who's running the centre. Would you accept that that's not an ideal process, because a lot of people would be reluctant to forward any complaints that they may have about a particular centre to the people who are actually running the centre?
Yeah, in relation to complaints, there is a four-stage process whereby the resident can make an informal complaint to the manager, a formal complaint to the manager, a formal complaint to RIA, and then to the Ombudsman. But it is open to the resident to go directly to the Ombudsman should they so wish. The Ombudsman visits most centres and did so in 2018, and found that most of the issues being brought to his attention were able to be resolved locally with the local manager at the point in time when they visited the centre. The reference to whether there's a culture whereby it's difficult for residents to complain, that was referenced in the last Ombudsman's report, but he did qualify that by saying that there was no evidence available to him to confirm that concern.
Okay. How much time have I, Chair? Have we enough for one more question?
You have. You're just on time.
Okay. Referrals to the Child and Family Agency. The latest data that I could get my hands on was going back to 2014, so I don't know if there's up-to-date data since then, and if there is, maybe you could provide it to the committee and certainly to myself. In terms of referrals, there was huge variations in terms of percentages of referrals of children within direct provision centres compared to children outside of direct provision centres. So, in other words, there was 14% of the population of children living in direct provision centres would have had referrals to the Child and Family Agency, which was significantly higher than those not within direct provision centres. Do we know why that wide variation is there?
Well, again, I don't have the statistics available to me, but I will look to get those for you. We reviewed our child welfare, our child protection policy after the Children's First Act of 2015, and the managers of a centre have become the mandated persons for the purposes of making referrals to the Child and Family Agency. We've provided training to those managers and a practice document in support of that. So effectively, the centre manager, as the mandated person, makes the referral to the Child and Family Agency.
Because I only have about a minute left, like 14% is being referred from children living in direct provision centres. The corresponding figure for children not living in direct provision centres is 1.6. So you can see there is a huge variation there. In terms of the type of referrals and whether they would actually reach the threshold for an initial assessment to be done, in direct provision centres it stands at 85%, and outside direct provision centres it stands at 50%. So there is certainly, in my opinion, reading the information that we have, there is an issue there which needs to be addressed. And I'm just, what steps are being taken to try and address those?
Well,
can I maybe just come in just generally, Deputy? First of all, the people in direct provision centres are asylum seekers. Many of them have come through quite traumatic experiences. And we're very conscious of that. And this would apply, obviously, to the children as much as to the adults who may have experienced any number of challenges in their young lives. For that reason, we have a child protection policy, a specific child protection policy for accommodation centres, and child safeguarding statements are published and so on. Accommodation centres which have children provide a whole series of facilities for them, And of course there is direct engagement with the HSE and so on around children's services and TUSLA. So the higher level of referrals that you're referring to is of course something that we should be very concerned about, but it may also reflect to some extent, proactivity in dealing with the challenges that we know people in our centres have, which is really important. And it applies to adults, but it particularly applies in the context of your question also to children.
Okay, I'll come in again.
Right. And next speaker is Deputy Murphy. She had been on the schedule. She had to step out. But just for the information of people watching, thank you for the schedule you circulated regarding the number of people in direct provision in asylum centres. And we'll note and publish this today. And we asked the figures about the various lengths of stay, and this relates to the 6,093 people in the centres. 289 of them are there over 4 years. 146 people are there over 5 years, 65 people are there over 6 years, and 142 people are there over 7 years. So I just want to put that in the record for information, and we'll circulate that schedule. Deputy Murphy, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, and apologies, I had to leave the room, so if I'm gone over territory that has been gone over while I was at another meeting. Just want to just refer to your opening statement on page 3 in relation to data protection. We have a lot of multinationals that are European headquartered in Ireland, and they would be particularly in the area where data and data protection is a very prominent issue. So we're essentially the European regulator, not just the Irish regulator. Has that been? Is there work going on in scoping out that obligation? Because that is a big obligation, and is there kind of any indicative costs associated with that?
Thank you, Deputy. Yes. The DPC, or well, as it was, the Office of the Data Protection Commission, it then became the Data Protection Commission under the new Act. There's a subtle difference in the transition from one to the other. There was detailed work done on what the responsibilities that would fall on the Data Protection Commission in Ireland in the context of the new GDPR. So that was done. The very rapid expansion in funding for the DPC that I indicated in my opening statement, which I don't have in front of me now, but it was from 1.9 million in 2014 to 19.5 in 2019. I mean, you would be hard put to find any other agency, I think, that has had a scale of increase in funding of that sort. That has mainly been around providing additional people with specific skills for the DPC because of the role that you've just mentioned. We're very conscious, first of all, that the DPC has a role in relation to advising all companies and proactively dealing with complaints and so on. I think it received about 4,000 complaints in 2018, if I remember correctly. So in relation to just activities in Ireland, if you like, it's normal DPC functions that you would expect. But we're also very conscious, obviously, and the DPC is very conscious of its responsibilities in the context of these companies being headquartered here. So you were right to say the Irish DPC has to take a lead role in the EU and is seen as the lead in the EU in that data protection regulation.
Okay. Right. Just yesterday, just on the data protection area, and I'm curious about the extent of independence for the Data Protection Commissioner, because yesterday the Communications Committee were told that it wouldn't be able to release a report into the Public Services Card if the Department of Social Protection they required the go-ahead from the Department of Social Protection, who are the lead department in relation to that. And there has been, and have you got concerns about the confusion about whether or not this card can be extended, is that costing money? Because there has been some flip-flopping on whether it's required or not required.
Well, the public service card, I am familiar with it actually more from my previous role, I have to say, in the Department of Agriculture, but the public service card is frankly the responsibility of another government department, so I couldn't really comment on its development. There is a very wide take-up of the public service card, perhaps wider than a lot of people recognise. But look, the answer to your question, I'm afraid, is that I'm not in a position to give a view on that.
Right. I just wanted to cover a few other areas, and some of them have been covered already. The area of direct provision has been.
Sorry, maybe just I understand I made a misstatement. The figure for the DPC in 2019 is 15.2 million.
Yeah,
I think I may have said something else.
Okay. Just going to page 16 of the vote 24. The Garda Ombudsman Commission. There was the estimate. There was a saving of 0.8 of a million. And that was due to not proceeding with an investigation into wrongful cancellation of fixed charge notices. My understanding is that there is queues of work for the Garda Ombudsman Commission. Why was that not? Why was that not? Could that not have been used at that time to actually deal with some of those queues?
Actually, so I mean, there is a saving on their heading, but of course they did retain the budget. In relation to the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, there was a review taken out of their requirements, and we have got clearance from the Department of Public Expenditure for an increase in their staffing by 42. Which is what they sought, actually. So it's fully what they sought. So it does give them the capacity to undertake additional inspections or investigations, as you indicate. But that doesn't relate specifically to this fixed charge notice issue, which was simply overtaken by events. And therefore it was decided not to proceed with that particular one. But we have provided the additional resources to allow them to undertake the investigations that they have to. It may be relevant to say, I don't want to hog the time here, it may be relevant to say that of course the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission now comes under the reform of policing proposed in the Commission on the Future of Policing report, the Coffey report, and there therefore will be further developments on that front.
Okay. Just I want to go to another topic, and it's within the Irish prisons, and it was the issue in relation to TB. One of the issues that we're looking at is, for example, with the State Claims Agency, where there are issues that are preventable. There was a fairly significant outbreak of TB in the Dublin prisons. It might have been Mountjoy, going back some years ago. Can I ask what has there been a change in how that's handled, because that's a notifiable disease, and was there compensation issues, was there isolation issues, as a consequence of that, or is that something that we really need to address to the prison service?
Yeah, unfortunately, Deputy, you may not have been here at the beginning. This vote is the Justice and Equality vote that we're looking at. So a few months ago, I addressed, along with my colleagues from the Prison Service, the Prisons vote. Quite simply, I don't have briefing material or colleagues with me from the Prison Service. But what I'll do is I'll just note the point you've made and provide you with a written response, if that's okay.
Okay. Sorry, the issue of bank accounts. we had quite a lot of hearings in relation to Templemore going back some time ago, and the whole issue of bank accounts was something that was dealt with in that context. The prison service will have bank accounts, and they seem to have changed. They seem to have changed their bank in 2018, 2019. Would that have been is that something that the department deal with, or is that exclusively the prison service that will deal with that? And what would be the reason why they would deal with that? Would that be a value for money issue, or would that be something that that would be prompted by something else?
I'm not sure exactly what the Deputy is referring to here now, so, and I don't wish to keep on this refrain. So the prisons, again, are a separate vote. I am the accounting officer for it. Garda is a separate vote, and the Commissioner is the accounting officer for that vote. So in relation to some of those issues, they would be more appropriate for when we're discussing either the Garda vote with the Commissioner or the prisons vote. Again, on a lot of these issues, I'm happy to take, if you like, questions in relation to the other votes, but to be honest with you, I will simply have to reply in writing in relation to any of those questions.
Okay. And if you would,
yeah,
if you would send us a note, that would be appreciated. There's a number of underspends. According to Vote 24, again, page 16, the Office of the Data Commissioner, 7.5 million was the estimate, and the outturn was 6.1, and that was primarily related to payroll expenditure. Why would that have happened?
It happened because what you're dealing with there is a period when the DPC was expanding very rapidly. So we were making provision for the full expansion in the year. But obviously recruiting people does take time, especially the highly skilled staff that the DPC recruit. So quite simply, the recruitment in this case wasn't up to the full level that had been envisaged when the vote was formed. But as I said earlier, Deputy, the increase in staffing levels in DPC has been very high. There was a 33% increase in staffing in 2016, a 57% increase in 2017, a 47% in 2018.
Yeah.
It's really an unparalleled increase in staffing numbers, and it's not particularly surprising that the process takes a little bit longer than is envisaged when we're doing the estimate.
Yeah. Okay, and I can understand that it was unusual in terms of ramping it up. Would that be at full capacity at this stage?
No, by the end of this year, I'm told. There's still recruitment going on.
And how many people would be employed?
168 is the figure I have for 2019. I think that's for the end of for the end of 2019.
And where are they located?
They have a few offices here in Dublin. I know that there is a process going on at the moment to identify a better long-term office solution for them. The DPC would be dealing with OPW, I think, largely directly on that.
Okay. So that
there are separate financial statements for the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. I audit them, and the Commission at some point may be of interest to the committee for a formal hearing in relation to that.
Okay. Thanks very much. And just want to just touch on the probation service. And there's it's when the probation service works well, it appears that the level of recidivism is reduced. So it's really an investment. And you might just address the issue of whether or not that there is sufficient capacity within the probationary services.
Thank you, Deputy. Yes, there are 404 staff. In January, it was 404 staff in the probation service. As to whether there is sufficient capacity, one very important area that is an expanding responsibility of the probation service is the management of community service. And there is a process of recruiting community service supervisors. Now, community service is expanding in this country and is proving to be, as I understand it, extremely effective. But it has not expanded. It has not expanded at quite the rate that had been anticipated. So what I'm really saying is that as the community service does expand further, and I would expect it to expand further as various issues are ironed out, I would envisage that I wouldn't be surprised if the probation service needed additional staff in that respect. I hope the Director of the Probation Service does not take that as an absolute commitment from his accounting officer at this point, but I'm just pointing it out as an area to answer your question where we're expanding and the probation service is doing this job.
And what kind of skill sets are you recruiting, and what will be the capacity that you would at this point expect to be at? If you have 404 staff now, what are you working towards?
Yeah, probation service staff generally have a social work type qualification, a social working background. I don't think they're all have precisely the same qualification. There'd be a range of qualifications among them, but it's broadly in that kind of space, and that is the culture of the probation service. It's a social work type culture.
And community service supervisors, like how many of those are we talking about? Like, are they? I mean, obviously they're spread throughout the country.
So I'm just seeing, do I have the exact? The probation service in 2018. I may have the exact figure, but anyway, the probation service received sanction to recruit 17 community service supervisors over a 2-year period. As I say, that was put in place in anticipation of a growth in community service that didn't quite happen.
And how many have been recruited?
And for that reason, there was a saving on the community service vote. On the probation service vote of 889,000 in relation to community service vacancies. As the provisions of the Fines Act are fully implemented, which has been slower than anticipated, we would expect the community service supervisor group to expand. I understand that 43 candidates have been placed on panels. So
can I just ask, so you were hoping to recruit 17. Have you recruited the 17?
7 so far, I'm told.
Right. And essentially, just in terms of value for money, how much does it cost on average to keep somebody in prison?
Now, I actually, at my last appearance here, I had exactly the figures that you were looking for. 68,000, and the figure for probation.
We have it on our documentation.
The figure for probation, of course, is a fraction of that.
Yeah, and
which I think is probably the point.
The point I'm making is if we're looking for value for money and better outcomes, a reduction in the recidivism rate, it tends to suggest the cost-benefit analysis, if you're looking at it purely from that point of view, is that that's a really decent investment. If it's costing on average 68,000 to incarcerate somebody who's likely to go on and repeat the behaviour if it's not modified. So you've 7 of the 17 that you're hoping. When do you hope to have the full complement? Or will there be a second round then?
No, as I said, there's actually a panel in place, so I take it that they're drawing off that panel at the present time. I don't have those specific figures in front of me, but there is a panel in place, as I understand it. Can I just take your broader point and agree with you absolutely 100%? This is exactly the direction of travel we want to go in. if you look at the report of the Commission on the Future of Policing too, it's highly relevant here, and it takes a much more holistic view of policing or of managing vulnerable people who are involved, who become involved in crime and so on. So the direction of travel is to divert people, particularly young people, away from prison and so on and into these more social work type services where they hopefully can be helped to develop a life away from crime and a fulfilling life.
It only works if there's certainty and if there's a degree of sanction as well, if people don't comply.
And that's what we're trying to get the balance on in the review of the Fines Act, for example, is to try and find that balance.
Okay, right.
Thanks. I just asked a few brief questions and some people... Or did Deputy Cullinane, you didn't get in yet?
No.
Sorry, yeah, we're out to see Deputy Cullinane next.
Thank you. Welcome to Mr O'Driscoll and Ms McPhillips. I start with direct provision and asylum seekers, if I can. Mr O'Driscoll, I know a lot of the questions have been asked already, but there's just some issues I wanted to have clarified. First of all, there is a lot of myths around asylum seekers, as I'm sure you're aware. So what exactly is direct provision in the sense that what is a person entitled to? So what is directly provided for, and what is the weekly means of, or subsistence means or rates that a person in a direct provision centre would get?
Yes, first of all, in relation to direct provision, the most important point to make, actually, is that I think it's about 75% of people who seek asylum end up in direct provision. So it is quite possible for people to turn it down. It's an offer. It's not a requirement. So about 25% of people choose not to take up that offer, and they live with family or friends or whatever it is. The figures on that have varied over the years, as I understand it. I think, in fact, the figures of people who choose not to go into direct provision were significantly higher some years ago, and then were lower in other years. So that's a very important point about direct provision. It is, in that sense, voluntary. Now, it's voluntary, recognising that people turn up very often with nothing. So they have that. They have to take what they can get, I suppose, in that context. The rate of payment you've asked about, that's handled from the Department of Social Protection. It's being increased from $21.60 per adult to $38.80 per adult per week, and from $15.60 per child to $29.80 per child. This is in the context of the direct provision arrangement providing housing and full board and, basic medical requirements and so on. So every direct provision, every asylum seeker in direct provision also has a medical card. So that is also, covered in the normal way. So, and of course, access to education facilities. So I think the payment has to be understood in that context. It is from the Department of Social Protection.
And when somebody is in the direct provision programme, if you want to call it that, or is being provided for directly, their accommodation and the subsistence rate that you outlined, are they allowed to work?
If they're in the direct provision system if they're in the asylum protection, the asylum application system for 9 months or more, they get the right to work. This is relatively recent. Over 3,000 people, around 3,000 people have applied for the right to work. Sorry, 2,300 applications to date, 1,600 approved. 632 employment declaration forms returned.
Is that new? Because there was a point when you just weren't allowed to work.
It is new, yeah.
So that's new. So at what point does that kick in? 9 months? Is it when of being in the system?
Yeah. Deputy, in June 18, that's when Ireland opted into the recast conditions directive, which part of that directive provides for access to the workplace after 9 months from date of application.
Okay.
So that directive, just to go back to something the Secretary-General was talking about, also includes material conditions, like in terms of requirements to provide housing, food, etc. So it's a state obligation to provide these under EU law since Ireland opted into that directive.
Okay. But I think it's fair to say that given the fact that, or notwithstanding the fact that people have their accommodation needs directly provided for, food directly provided for, medical costs, and what I would see is very low levels of subsistence, but they are the rates, that it isn't a desirable medium to long-term solution, because there are obviously individual freedoms that you don't have because of the fact that you're in these centres. Now, we have the figures in terms of how long people are in these centres. We'll get to those in a second. But obviously there is a direct correlation between the asylum process and how long it takes to have claims processed and how long people stay in the system. So your department is responsible for the asylum applications and that process. So what work has been done, can you tell us, in recent times, or what changes have been made in recent years to speed up the asylum processes to ensure that applications can be processed much quicker and people then are less dependent on being in the direct provision system, and then one way or the other, if their asylum is granted and they're refugees, they can go and work and have those freedoms maybe that they don't have if they're in direct provision centres. So very quickly, if you could just outline to us what changes in recent years have been made to speed up the process, and what is the average wait time for someone that applies to having an adjudication on their application? What would be the average wait time?
So I'll ask my colleague Michael Cran in a moment just to give you the precise figures, but just in terms of the policy, you are right that there have been delays in terms of people going through the process, and a lot of effort has been put into trying to improve that through additional staff and improving processes and so on. And Mr. Cran will in a moment just outline some of that. Can I just pick up one of your points, Deputy? Just in terms of saying, is it important to say that people in the accommodations centres have, of course, full rights? I mean, they're not confined there, they're not detained there, they come and go, and everything else. So it is true to say, of course, everybody would prefer, we assume, to move on to normal housing.
Okay, can I just stop you there, Mr. O'Driscoll? Yeah. And I put this on the record before, a number, I think it was 2 years ago, when the Department of Justice were in, was your predecessor, and I think RIA were in as well. That's not my experience right across the board. And I've had experience of having to visit reception centres in the past. Now, things have changed, thankfully, but they are private entities which are run privately. Some of them had different rules. I was invited a number of years ago when I was a member of Waterford City and County Council to visit one of these centres, invited by the residents, turned up and was refused entry. Yeah. I was asked to seek an appointment, which I did. That was refused by management. And I wasn't the only one that happened to. There was a number of NGOs and a number of other organisations which were invited in to assist and support people who lived there. And there's also, because you talked about rights, people have a right as well to vote in local elections. I was refused permission to canvass. I subsequently, on the basis of being refused permission to canvass, which is anybody's right, I can canvass you or anybody in this room, but they weren't allowed to be canvassed. I wrote to them, sent them a letter, each of them, posted directly to the reception centre. The letters were opened, and the letters were then put in the bin by the manager of the centre. So that to me doesn't suggest that their rights are the same as anybody else. Now, things have changed since then, but what I'm saying is that there are individual freedoms associated with living in your own home, whether it's through social housing or private housing, that I don't believe is afforded to people who live in reception centres. And I don't accept that all of the freedoms that I and you enjoy are being enjoyed at this point in time by people in direct provision centres. And notwithstanding the changes in terms of people being allowed to work, there are still some who are not allowed to work, obviously, because up to 9 months they can't work. So there are freedoms you have to accept that are denied. I'm not saying that things haven't changed. I'm accepting that fully. And I'm conscious of the positive changes that have happened, but I still hold the view that it's not the same as the rights that I or you would enjoy.
Okay, well, look, we agree that it has changed. So I was speaking in the present tense. And we are in a situation, we're very conscious, in fact there were a number of deputies in the past who raised the issue about being able to canvass people and being able to meet with residents and so on. And I think a lot of progress has been made on that. And if there are any issues that arise from time to time, notify us and we will sort it out. I mean, people make mistakes. But my understanding now is that people do have the right to canvass, of course. In any centre, in fairness, and I've been just in a few centres, in one centre I visited, I can't see that there should be any problem in canvassers accessing the place in a perfectly normal way. On another, it's more difficult to say exactly where is the private space, private communal space, which you wouldn't expect canvassers to have access to, realistically, and where is the public space. So distinguishing those things is not always absolutely crystal clear, and people, as I say, can make mistakes. But I do think on all of those things, the reason I reacted to what you said, Deputy, is actually more because from time to time there is public comment. I wasn't particularly reacting to your comment, which grossly exaggerates the constraints that people operate under. I accept, of course, they do. So you're quite right to say they don't have the right to work for the first 9 months. That's a right you or I do have. That's absolutely true. There are also people coming from very often very difficult circumstances who are accessing our services for the first time and probably finding it difficult to navigate those services. We try to assist them in that. And again, they have rights in that space that we try to vindicate. But the broader point I wanted to make was a simple one. I just want to make it clear that people have freedoms here, and that some of the commentary that is out there is just
and I accept that,
unfair.
and I think that's a fair point for you to make as an accounting officer. I have no difficulty with that, and I would agree that changes have been made which are positive, which I've seen on the ground in my own constituency in Waterford, so I fully accept that. But we have a long way to go, I think, as well. Just if you can come back on the changes that have been made in terms of the asylum process and the application process, if you can.
Yes, Deputy. Since the introduction of the International Protection Act, now there was a period initially which was a transition arrangement under the Act that did require a lot of cases to come back under the that Act, and that did create some problems initially. And there was about 3,500 cases that had to be dealt with before they could get to dealing with new cases under the Act, and that created a difficulty, but that has now been substantially dealt with. But it did mean that the average processing times did move out as a result, and they're currently around 19.7 months.
If I can just
for
come
new
to
cases, it's now down to 14 months. 14 months, okay. And the intention is by this year that they will be down to an average of 9 months.
Yeah.
So we have 3,600 live cases on at the moment, of which 2/3 of them are already scheduled for interview, and there's 1/3 that is yet to be scheduled. To put that into perspective, we have precisely that amount of new applications received since the 1st of January. So we're catching up rapidly, and we have expanded the staff in the area to deal with that. There are approximately 144 staff in the IPO with 70 legal panel members who hear cases. So our intention is to deal with and give first instance decisions as quickly as possible.
Can I just ask, maybe a note is given to us on that, and I think that those changes are positive as well and very much welcome. And if those targets are genuine targets, which I accept that they are, if we can get that in writing when Mr O'Driscoll and Ms MacPhillips are before us again, we can hold you to account to those targets. But I think they're very welcome.
Send us that note into the committee, but give the average time going back over the last decade, because I was here years ago and verbatim the same was said when the numbers were much higher and they were dropping and we're getting there, and I think we were there before. I literally what you said, I heard ministers saying verbatim that 5 years ago. So just give us a longer term perspective, not just where we are today. You see how it has moved, because like all those things, they go up and down as the years go by.
Then follow on from that, because the note that you gave in relation to the length of time that people in reception centres, about 10.5% are in reception centres for between 4 years and 7 years, which is quite high. Why, if it is the case that the asylum processes are getting faster, or there's a quicker processing of the applications, how is it then that we still have 10%, 1 in 10, and I'm assuming is that individuals or families, but if it's 1 in 10, whether it's families or individuals, yeah, from 4 to 7 years, why would there still be people in the system that long?
There can be a number of reasons for that, Deputy, including the fact that it's everyone's right to judicially review any decision that they get, and sometimes those decisions are judicially reviewed on a number of occasions. So it can take time before the entire process is dealt with from beginning to end. Also, we don't segregate families, just to make clear, so that if one member of a family is held up for whatever reason, it means that the entire family is held up, because we don't separate families. So if a decision is made in relation to a series of other family members, that can add to those figures. Okay, Mr. Grant, there's almost 30% of people waiting from 2 years to 7 years, which again is quite high. But in local authority accommodation, if you're in emergency accommodation or you're classed as homeless, there's weekly meetings that take place that look at all of those cases. So what work is done by the department on a weekly basis in terms of that 10.5% or the 20%? I understand some of them might be judicial reviews, there might be other issues. So is it the case that there's an ongoing examination of those people who are long-term in direct provision to see what can be done, where is their case? Is it that we're waiting for information from them, or is it that they need to take the next step? What interventions are made by the department or by RIA, whichever one it is, that looks at helping and assisting the applications being processed quicker, so that they don't end up 4 to 7 years or longer?
Just to say, Deputy, that in the case of people who are there a long time, of course, some of them are in the category that we talked about earlier, who have permission to remain. As we said, the 730 odd people in that category, some of them would be from among the longer period residents. Quite simply, we are hitting difficulties in finding ways to moving them into normal housing, but we are trying to engage with NGOs and with local authorities in that respect. Others are coming through, as Mr. Curran said, the judicial review process, and the courts work in the way the courts work, and we have to respect that. It is absolutely in the interests of the department to move all of those processes.
But would you have data in relation to that? So say of that 10.5%, would you have data in terms of how many are still there because of judicial reviews, or how many are, not giving us names of individuals, but could you furnish this committee with a bit more breakdown as to the status of that 10.5%, so we can then see if it is a case that they're waiting in the courts, there isn't anything you can do. That's just the way it is. But if there are other issues, information in general, if that can be provided. Just in terms of the information you gave us as well, and I'm reading from, I think it's an Irish Times report as well, over 500 asylum seekers now living in hotels and B&Bs. This may have been raised earlier, I'm not sure. But there was 196, it seems, from this media report that were asylum seekers that were in emergency accommodation in November of last year. By February it reached 329, and it's now 517. Why is it increasing so rapidly? And why, that's a very high figure of 517, I would say. So why is that the case?
It is increasing extremely rapidly. We did go through this in some detail earlier, I think. It's increasing because of capacity limits. We've hit capacity limits in our normal accommodation centres. So I mentioned earlier, Deputy, that we don't wish to be in the business of housing people in hotels. It's absolutely not where we want to be. But in an emergency situation, we're not going to leave somebody homeless, so we have to put them somewhere. And in an emergency, a hotel is the only realistic option.
How much is that costing per year for those 517? It says here 4.5 million. Would that be right?
Yeah, I'll get you the exact figure, but it's expensive. It is, you know, the average cost of a hotel.
Wouldn't it be much more cost effective if we were dealing with them directly, rather than in emergency?
Absolutely, but we're in a position where our accommodation centres are full. and we gave the figures earlier.
I understand that, but then you have to build a new accommodation centre, so is there a problem? I know there was difficulties in some areas. Deputy MacSharry went through some of those, maybe some others did as well, in opening centres. Some were due to open and there was fire problems and there was other issues, but is there a difficulty with opening reception centres in areas? Is it that you're meeting with hostility, or is it that it's planning issues, or is it that you can't find premises? What's the main problem in identifying premises?
No. I mentioned earlier, in response to Deputy MacSharry's, sorry, I can't remember, the question as to a number of accommodation centres closing, I pointed out that from...
But it's your job, sorry, Mr. It's your job to make sure that the accommodation is there. It's your job to make sure we have sufficient number of reception centres and accommodation premises for people. So good planning is that you would make sure that that's the case. And if we end up in a situation where we have a very rapid increase in emergency accommodation, that's down to either bad planning or some other reason. So I'm trying to establish what the reason is.
Okay, and
in simple
can I answer
terms,
you?
what's the reason for it?
And I'll give you an answer, okay? So from September 2017 to September 2018, we put in place 880 new places in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 accommodation in new centres. We are doing tenders throughout the country at the present time. We're doing it on a regional basis to provide new accommodation centres for the level of demand we are experiencing. But as we discussed earlier, in relation to the asylum side as distinct from the refugee side, we find it very difficult to predict the number of people who will turn up and seek accommodation. Right? People turn up in Dublin Airport, they turn up in Burke or elsewhere, and we have to accommodate them that night. It's not something we can plan for. It's quite different in the refugee programme, where we have a sense of who's coming. I don't like interrupting when you're answering the question, but if there has been a massive increase in demand, then you have to prove that is the case. So can you provide us with the figures where in recent times there has been such an increase in demand that you're not in a position to be able to meet their needs simply because of an unexpected increase in demand? Well, all of the increase in people in direct provision centres is because of increase in demand. So in 2016, I gave the figures in my opening statement.
No, but I'm saying increase above where it would have been for the previous 6 months or 12 months or 2 years.
So in 2016 it was 4,425, in 2017 5,096, in 2018 6,106. And so on, it's going up. So we are trying to ensure that we have the necessary space available, and we're using this tender process to try and find the relevant level of accommodation. But, Deputy, I can't predict for you the level of accommodation we'll need in 2021-22. We will try to estimate it. We will try to put the relevant accommodation in place. But we can't be certain of it because we can't be certain of who will turn up at our doorstep.
I have one more question if I can, but what you haven't answered is why there is difficulty in finding new premises. In one simple response, I know there might be, if you can't answer the question simply, you might give us a detailed note on it.
Well, no, we are finding new accommodation. I said to you we found 880 in the period I identified. We now have tenders.
No, but you said to me earlier on in response to the 526 people who were homeless, your initial response wasn't that there was an increase in demand. I was the one that cited that. What you said is that we don't have the accommodation.
That's right.
Yeah.
The pace of increase in application is higher than the pace of increase in our accommodation system. But we are increasing the scale and scope of our accommodation system. But keeping pace with the level of demand is difficult, particularly when we're not in a position to predict that demand.
Okay. I just have one final question, if I can. Internal audit of any department or organisation is important for the PAC because obviously internal audit can examine issues where there might be wrongdoing or where there is a lax, I suppose, in procedures, in governance issues and so on. So I'm aware that the department carried out an investigation into claims that almost 90,000 in funding was misused by a non-government body working in the sexual assault support sector. I know this was covered by RTE This Week programme, and I think the department is aware, I would imagine, of the audit findings. So what did the audit unit of your department undertake in that case? And can you report to us what the findings of the audit review were?
Yes, we've recently given the audit report to the CNAG. So an audit was undertaken following some information that reached the department in relation to one NGO, as you say. The broad finding of that report, obviously I won't go through the whole detail, but the broad finding of that report is that about 88,000 of the funding that went to that NGO was not used for the purposes for which we had provided it. Now, I want to make clear that there is no suggestion of fraud or anything like that. It's a question of what the audit identified as lax financial management within the NGO. So,
can we get a copy of that audit report?
Would it be okay to send a note to you on it with the main information?
Well, I know previous.
To be fair,
just bear with me for a second. The audit reports into Templemore, for example, were all furnished to this committee to allow us then to be able to establish whether or not there needs to be changes in procedures and practices. So, and we had very lengthy discussions with the auditors themselves on those issues and other audit sections of different departments. So the audit function is very important. It helps us do our work. So you might just reflect on whether or not you can give us a copy of the internal audit report, because I would imagine it would be helpful for me in understanding what happened. I'm not saying, and I'm accepting what you're saying, there was no fraudulent activity, and if there was lax standards, obviously that's a matter for this committee. But I know you've given it to the CNAG, probably in the course of his work in terms of the appropriation accounts. But I would like to see the report.
Yes, sorry, Deputy, I was unclear in what I said. I'm not saying we won't give you the report. However, we're in a position at the moment where we're considering what to do about the report, and it may involve a further step of engagement with this NGO.
But that's actions arising from the report.
It's actions arising. It's a little bit more, because we have to. Some things were identified in the report. We sought the possible repayment of the funds. The NGO has indicated it's not in a position to do that. So there's a second phase, if you like, where we have to look at their capacity to repay.
But it doesn't really matter how many phases. If we just make this point, look, internal audit is independent of you. Yeah, and internal audit simply reports to you, and it reports on facts. So there's no reason, in my view, why we can't get a copy of a report of what the facts were, what you do as a next step, or what internal audit does as a next step. It may well seek to do more examination, I don't know, or you might have to act on foot of the audit report. That's entirely different. Yeah. So I would suggest that you reflect on that, and if you can, give us a copy of the internal audit report.
Right.
Right. Just now, before we go on to second, just a few quick questions from myself, and I'll be very concise. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Tribunal, I see there's a heading called Compensation for Personal Injuries Criminally Inflicted. Is that the same thing?
Yes.
Right. Every time I put in a PQ about that, I'm told they're waiting to appoint people. They'll be meeting shortly. It seems to be a hit and a miss kind of an organisation. I think you're relying on probably barristers or legal people to come and serve on it. Can you just send us a detailed note as to how it's operating? Because for years I'm hearing about cases that are taking a long time in the system. So I presume who's over that? Is there somebody separate, or is there a person in your own department?
Sorry, Chairman. Yeah. We can certainly furnish you with a note you've asked for. My understanding is that they are fully staffed. The Law Reform Commission is looking at the issue of this scheme, the terms of this scheme, or has been asked to look at it rather. So there may be further developments, but in any case, you're looking for facts.
Where we're now,
we'll send it to you. Exactly.
It's historic. Yeah. These type of PQs replies I'm getting over several years.
We'll do that. Yeah.
So future is fine, but just historic. So you come back to us on that. Next thing I want to ask you is, people will be amused at this, but I'm looking at page 16 on your accounts. The Irish classification, the Irish film classification now for 433,000. Like, you know, what kind of relevance are they now? We can all turn on our TV and social media. Have they any relevance in the modern society? I know they probably years ago, when the only time you could see a film is if you went to the cinema. But has life passed by that organisation? And there's another organisation there called the there's a classification for films appeals board, right? So did they do much, or what did they do, or are they in a little? And I see they didn't spend their money because there was a reduction in screen hire costs during the year under review. Underspend of 190,000 on screen rental. Did they have to rent the screens to watch them after how many years are they in existence?
Yeah. Well, actually,
I see the figures, but
did you see the figures on the fees?
Okay. On which page?
Sorry, I don't know where that is. Yeah, that'll be the appropriations and aid. They actually run a profit.
Have they a separate account?
Yeah, no, but it comes through our account. So if you look at the estimate, in fact, the outturn in 2017
fees were 1.5 million received.
And where's that in this?
It's in the appropriation. It's appropriations and aid, note 4 on page 23.
Oh yeah.
And as to the relevance of it, it's a classification of us now rather than a censorship business. So it provides guidance to people as to whether or not a film is appropriate for a young person to view.
Okay, and to do with all the games people have on Xbox and PlayStations that the youngsters have?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Well, can you send me a note? Because to me that's far more...
send you a note on that, yeah.
More young people spend time on PlayStation and Xbox, not going to the cinemas, right? Or looking at something that their parents are watching on TV, and parents can have parental control of their box on the television or whatever. But send us a note. I just get the feeling there's a big gap.
They do. Do you want to?
Yeah.
If you have additional information.
Can add to it.
I don't particularly want to spend a lot of time talking about this necessarily, but they are the Irish end of a pan-European video gaming classification scheme, which is not a statutory scheme, but again is advisory to users, to parents, people buying video games.
So is any of their work statutory, or is it all?
All the film classification and DVD classification is.
So DVD is classified, the films in the cinema. So the only bit is not really hasn't.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
The statutory. They have that. But I would have thought in this day and age the most important aspect of what to do is what the younger people are looking at, as in their Xbox and violent games and on their place or whatever else to use. Like, I'm surprised that we have all the classification. I know if I go to the cinema it's over 18 or over 12 or unaccompanied or accompanied, but I'm looking at the relevance of that for the young people. I think there's a gap there.
I guess they would recognise themselves that they're
you get the concern I mean.
Of course they do,
yeah. I think the role needs to be broader, and if they have a statutory role for cinema, there's a greater need for a statutory role when it comes to what youngsters are buying. You know.
If I can say,
can come back with a broad.
Yeah, and they're an unusual inclusion in the responsibility of the Department of Justice and Equality. I think a lot of people are quite surprised that this agency is within our remit, but nevertheless, I'm sure that they'd be quite happy to give a note setting out what they do and the policy and other framework.
Especially what they don't do.
Oh, what they don't do, yeah.
Yeah, because that farm, I'm more concerned about the gaps in their system rather than accounting for the bit they actually do. These are just a few quick questions. The Insolvency Service of Ireland, are they audited separately by yourself? So we can ask them separately. Then, on your annual report, you have given us your annual report. You needn't go through it, but at the very back of it, you have about 3 pages of different organisations. Some are statutory, some are regulatory, some are appellate bodies, some are non-statutory agencies. Can you just do a summary note in relation to each of those? Some of them crop up, on different schedules. Is there a formal, what I would call a service level agreement in place for each of the organisations to whom you grant money? Presumably there is. We've been this with other agencies. Just give us the list, when the current one was signed. And if you have it, you can circulate it. And the last question then, and Mr. Burke from Deeper, I'm going to ask you to just come in on that just in a moment. In relation to the asylum centres, just tell us what's covered: their bed, their board, their accommodation, their food, their education, their transport if they're in and out of town, their buses, public transport laid on. They all have medical cards. What else am I missing?
I think you've covered the main items. I don't know if my colleague Mark or Carol want to say a few words.
So how much do they get then, kind of for spending money? we'll call it, you know, extra. What's the figure?
Carol, will you go ahead?
38.80, Chair, and it also
38.80
for an adult
per week. Yeah, because
per
sometimes
week,
the message gets
29.80.
out there. They come down and they get 38.80 a week. It's probably costing 100 or 200. I don't know what the average cost per person is, but it's costing. You know, that 38.80 is only a fraction of the cost to maintain that person in the centre.
Yes, as you say, Chair, it covers accommodation, light, heat, all the utilities, access to Wi-Fi, access to toiletries, all of their food, laundry, transport if the centre is located, you know, somewhat outside an urban area.
Yeah.
So it covers all of the general needs.
Yeah, fine. And the reason I want Mr. Burke to come in to send a note, to just send a comparative note, because people will feel that's terrible. But where I want you to get the figure from the HSE and give me a comparison between the two, somebody on the fair deal goes into a nursing home. They get their nursing home accommodation paid and their food paid and their light paid. I don't think it's, you know, I don't know, they wouldn't have the same transport requirements necessarily, or they wouldn't have the same education requirements once an older person is in the fair deal. They don't automatically get medical cards in the nursing homes. You know, it's deemed they're being generally taken care of. And through yourselves get the figure, they're allowed to keep, I think, 15% of their social welfare payment approximately, which is approximately €30 for their own spend the money. I'm asking you to. So I just want to see, is there, it appears there's probably an equality of, given that all costs, living costs are covered in those centres, compared to how we treat our own elderly people in nursing home. People mightn't like me going here.
Was it from those comments now?
Okay, I just want the figures, and people can draw the conclusions from the figure. I won't comment. I'd just like to see the comparative costs of how much people, you know, have for disposable income if they're in one institution run by the state compared with another institution paid for by the state. I just want the comparative financial figures, and people can comment on them after. I make no comment. I'm just asking for the financial figures to be produced. Okay, sorry. Now we're on the second round of speakers, so Deputy Connolly was first and Deputy MacSharry was second. Yeah.
Sorry, just.
And I know people might have.
Just procedurally. Rather than bringing all the witnesses back in the afternoon and presuming that each of us can get in here, I'd be prepared to forego part of the voting block in the interest of our witnesses.
I'm told one vote today.
Rather than holding it back, it's up to them.
Does anyone know what the vote is on specifically?
No, but the witnesses should have a break as well.
Yeah, no,
I agree with that.
We're stopping at about 1 o'clock because we started about 10 or quarter past 10. I'm not going to be on 3 hours one way or the other. Okay. You know, 3 hours is...
Yeah, well, like 15 minutes to make all the difference is all I'd suggest.
That's okay.
All.
I know, I agree. If the witnesses are agreeable in the break.
I'd like to let them go, and I'd like to just get finished the bit that I started.
There's an advantage in finishing it up too at the same time. Yeah. Okay, well, maybe if people can...
I'll go quick. Just Chair, on that...
Try 5 minutes,
just Chair, on that, I don't think it's a fair comparison what you just did, but we have international obligations in relation to asylum seekers, and really we've had a Mahon report, we've had an Ombudsman's report and so on. So the changes have been wrought from the system. Just let me say that. I want to welcome, Mr O'Driscoll, your openness and honesty. I welcome that, and I welcome the straightness of all your companions. I think it's very helpful. But just in that, I wouldn't like a message going out that the system is overwhelmed, because I've looked back at the Controller and Auditor General's chapter, and in 2015 there were 4,696 in direct. Today the 6,106. I don't think they're overwhelming figures, and then you have to take out the 700 and something that are there with status. So really there hasn't been a massive jump, and what's happened is this one, we have a housing crisis, and two, alternatives were never looked at. Repeatedly before this committee, in terms of value for money, alternatives were never looked at. And in fact, touching on just on what the Chair said, it was a sort of an approach, they're lucky to get what they got. So that's just by way of, I appreciate your openness and honesty, and I'm just returning it. I wouldn't like that message to go out. Just a couple of quick questions. Judge Murray did a report some stage. I remember reading it. I didn't take it with me. Serious issues in relation to a directive and data privacy. What happened as a result of that? The EU directive was no longer valid. It had been withdrawn, and our legislation was. If you don't know, I don't mind, because I can't remember. I remember reading it and being shocked at the findings of Justice Murray at the time, and legislation had to be enacted. I don't think it ever was. That's number one. Number two, the more specific question is in relation to the integration fund, a very positive fund. And when I read your annual report, or one of your reports, it says there's 50 million in this. Now, I'm looking at it on page of your reports, page 22, Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund. And again, you have credits in this. There are credits in it, which is extraordinary. And you're an estimate provision of 1.5 million, and the outturn was less. So that's just the specifics. But am I wrong? Is that coming from a fund of 50 million over a period of time to help in terms of integration?
Yes.
And why is it being underspent when there are so many glaring issues in relation to helping people and local communities indeed? What I see in relation to this...
Yeah, I'll try just so. What I think you're talking about is the AMIF fund,
I'm not thinking,
which 52.6 million, as you say, over the period 2014 to 2020.
Yes.
Now, this is an EU co-funded scheme. In other words, like all the other EU schemes that I'd be familiar with from my previous work, you expend the money first and you recoup subsequently. This is a fund that's on a rising curve of expenditure. So,
so over that period, that money is available to be spent, which is very positive.
Yes, and will be, I hope. Yes.
Well, now it's nearly 2020.
Indeed, and it is. To be fair, and I can reference other EU co-funds of a similar ESF and agriculture funds. Where it does tend to be the case that it is towards the end of the planning period that the greatest expenditure happens, because of the ramping up costs and so on is slow.
Just again, I would love if there was a proactive approach in relation to that, given the difficulties that have been experienced throughout the country, rather than making something a problem when it's a positive challenge both for the local communities and for the people coming into our country.
And absolutely. Just to break out the 52 million, almost 30 million of this is received by way of a grant per person resettled or relocated. So the discussion that we had earlier in relation to relocation and resettlement of the IRPP, the refugee programme, if you like. Yeah. This money kicks into that process. 22.6 million is committed to various activities set out in our national programme for AMIF, which is agreed with the EU Commission. And this covers expenditure on resettlement, relocation, integration projects, voluntary enforcement.
I'm interrupting you, but not in a bad way. If we could just get a note on it.
We'll give you a note.
Just give us a note on it. Yeah. Finally, just on citizenship, I see the number of citizenship applications were down last year. But then, when we have people coming into our offices, and it's a general point, not parochial, there's a delay. I mean, it's a positive thing for the country. It brings money into the country. There's an application fee. That's one part. And the second part is visas. It occurs, for example, somebody coming from India. They've been recruited by a recruitment firm. They're told their husbands can join them or their partners, and then there's a delay. So just those two aspects in relation to citizenship. What is the backlog? Why the delay? And then in terms of reunification, not that's the wrong word, but partners or wives coming to join. Thanks, Chair. That's the end of me. Yeah.
I'll deal with the second aspect first, if you don't mind, Deputy. We've been aware for a while of difficulties, particularly with skilled people coming to Ireland.
No, I'm aware of that now, and that's why
we're working on, who then wish to bring their spouse and family with them. And recently, we have agreed with the Department of Public Enterprise and Innovation to change the rules around dealing with spouses of critical skills permit holders. So from now on, those people will not have to go to seek a separate work permit in order to access the labour permit, and we will give them an immigration permission that allows spouses and partners
when will
to
that
access
when will
the
that be in
reports.
place?
It's already in place, and from the 1st of this month, we've introduced a new scheme for de facto partners of critical skills workers as well.
Lovely.
So a detailed note on that, because
Just citizens then, sorry, citizens.
On citizenship, we have last year 12,700 applications for citizenship. The year before that it was 11,770. Our outputs are increasing in line with that. Our aim is to process cases straightforward cases within about 6 months. And we're adhering to those timelines at the moment. Of course, there are other cases that can take longer, and there can be complications that require us to do inquiries from other jurisdictions abroad, etc.
Is Brexit an issue in that?
We are seeing some increase in applications from UK nationals. So of the 1,000 or so increase in 2018, about half of that is due to an increase in UK nationals applying for citizenship. But these are UK nationals who are perhaps living in Ireland for some period of time and are now choosing to apply for Irish citizenship.
Okay, thank you. Now, just before I call Deputy MacSharry, just one point of clarification. When you were sending us a note a few minutes ago, we spoke about people being allowed work now that you get employment while they're still in the centres, right? And you spoke briefly, the people you said the rules changed last year, whenever it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
In relation to the right to work for asylum.
In relation to the right. And I'm asked to send a detailed note, but I just know from my centre in Portlaoise, I had people coming complaining when that was introduced that because they were in the centre a period of time, the newer people in had the right. It only affected people that arrived in Ireland after a certain day. You might clarify it.
We will clarify the arrangement. There are complicated transition arrangements.
Does it include everyone who's here 5, 6, 7 years? Because a couple of them people in the centre in Portlaoise would approach me at the time saying that they felt it was only relevant for people who had recently come to the state.
It depends on whether when they got their decision and how long ago they had got a decision. If they got a negative decision sometime previous to that, then they may not have qualified.
How do you mean decision?
A decision on their asylum application.
Oh, you're saying
so
if they already had a rejection and they're here under appeal, they wouldn't be eligible for that scheme.
Yeah, I will get you the precise details, Chairman. I don't want to mislead the committee.
No, but give me the comprehensive note. So, in relation to people who are here, had a refusal, but are still here. Do they have a right to work, or is it only people who are pending their first decision? That's what I'm really.
Yeah. And I can say it's not as straightforward as you've just articulated, so that's why I don't want to mislead the committee.
And please don't.
I want to get you a precise note.
I'm asking you to draft a considered
We'll provide a detailed.
Provide a considered note, and you can see I'm only just based it on the couple of people who approached me directly. May not be the full picture, so you give us the full picture in writing when you have enough to it.
Can I just correct a figure that was given earlier on in answer to a question by Deputy Connolly? We said that there were 957 children in the Direct Provision Centre. It's actually greater than that. 957 is the number of school-going children, school-going age children. The full number is 1,630.
1,630.
1,630.
So in the 957 school going.
So there's a lot of very young children, in other words.
Oh, so I was just going to say. So, but is the total figure 1,630?
Yes.
And so 957 are school going, and the rest are under school going age.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay.
I mean, there's 673 children under school going. 670 under school going age.
And if you visit a centre, actually, that's in retrospect, that is actually quite visible.
Wow, that's a very big.
They all accompanied children, all with family, all with a parent or somebody.
Yes, I think so, yes.
Okay, thanks for the
recent situation that there's so many young children here. No,
I wouldn't think so. People turn up with babes in arms.
Yeah, we understand. Or thereabouts. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Deputy MacSharry. Want to come in?
Yeah, just
thank you, Deputy.
From my own perspective, kind of 15 minutes would probably do it. But do you want to offer a break for convenience or anything? Yeah, okay, great. Thanks very much. And again, I appreciate the Chairman and the Secretary General's understanding of what I'm doing here today. I had just finished off earlier what I was about to say, at the meeting in January 17th, the number of instances of sexual harassment that have occurred have been raised, and your letter following the meeting of, I think, February 7th, that there had been 9 that emerged between a 1, a 3 and a 5, according to the way you presented them. So can the department or the IPS advise if every instance, either intra-staff or as highlighted by a P19, P19 is a form, it seems, to register a complaint against a prisoner that was lodged by a prison nurse officer or agency nurse working within prison, has been acted upon, with the appropriate investigation and follow-up. And anticipating your answer, but obviously you can answer if the answer, is no. If it's not, would the department be prepared to, particularly in the interests of women working in the prison service and female contractors, would the department consider carrying out a confidential survey among female staff to inquire into these matters?
Okay, Deputy, can I suggest? I mean, it's not for me to. It's for the chairman. But again, I presume you're about to go through a list of questions in relation to the prisons. I'm geared up here today to deal with the Justice and Equality vote, not the prisons vote. But if you send us or give us now the list of your questions, we will endeavour to answer those questions as best we can. But I would propose to do so in writing with the advice of the prison service. Can I make the point that on the last occasion we were here on the prisons vote, you raised a large number of significant allegations also. We provided to the committee very detailed responses to those.
I'm coming to those.
And I've no doubt that you have further questions about those. And again, if you give those to us, we will endeavour to reply.
Well, the issue is some remain outstanding.
Well, I think we replied to every question we got.
If we require follow-through,
absolutely, absolutely, no problem.
Yeah. So, if I could, with the chairman's permission, continue the way I'm going. Yeah. I did at the outset say I appreciate that you don't have the relevant personnel with you today, but we can call it opportunism or we can call it efficient use of time. Putting to you and on the record these questions, which I'm quite happy, if you're not in a position to give a view on here, that you would revert to us in writing or in whatever way is appropriate. Sorry, Chairman.
Can I just ask, people, if you have some information, and I want you to just consider this. There may be a suggestion of criminality involved. I use the word may, or would you be satisfied you have evidence of criminality? Because
no, I'm not an investigator.
No, so you have,
I'm not an officer of the law.
You can't say there's a criminal event.
My only
there's matters of concern that
my only role here is in consequent to some initial research before the last meeting, and considerably more since questions have emerged. Right. So I'm not alleging any criminality. One way or another.
Correct. You just want the
but I'm raising matters of concern, which I feel prudence demands require investigation by the department in the first instance. I'm more than happy and welcome your own suggestion to send the transcript of the meeting to the Gardaí. That's a matter for yourself. And the Secretary-General and the department, and so consequently the IPS, will have these questions on record, which I have no doubt
just to be clear, I want to be clear on this.
Sure, yeah.
You have not established evidence of criminal wrongdoing.
I'm not a judge,
correct,
Chairman. I'm not a judge.
But there are concerns. But it's not
I'm not a judge. I have concerns, and I think that it would be a matter of public interest to put them in the public domain so that they do receive the appropriate level of inquiry.
Yeah, thank you.
And wouldn't it be great if all of the inquiries come back definitively outlining that there's nothing to see here, but I think prudence demands that we go there, because this isn't any kind of a vexatious attempt by me to spread falsities. PMDS, does that exist in the Department of Justice?
Of course, okay. Yes.
And so when PNM exists within the Department of Justice, so can you just outline very briefly how that works? And, if I'm a senior executive officer or something like that, so what?
So PMDS works by each year.
Deputy, or Mr. O'Driscoll, just tell the public who are watching what's PMBS. We might understand. The public watching it might not. Just spell it.
It's the Performance Management and Development System, which virtually every large organisation in the country and the world indeed would have in some form or other. So it is where at the beginning of the year a person would set out their what's usually referred to as their role profile. It identifies broadly, not in perfect detail, what it is they would be doing during the year, and identifies what they would be expected to deliver during the year. It also contains an indication of what their development needs are in terms of additional training and that kind of thing. And that is usually agreed between the person and their supervisor. And if necessary, if there's difficulty in agreeing that, it goes to the person senior to that again.
And does it go kind of automatically to more senior people, ultimately perhaps yourself or a principal or something for kind of sign off to say, okay, that's grand, their supervisor?
Yeah, in general, yes, they would make sure that it was done and that it was done satisfactorily.
Okay. And there's scoring, is there?
At the end of the year, there is a system whereby you record whether or not a person has performed satisfactorily or not satisfactorily against the
goals, right? And would those things be relevant then to increments?
They could be if you were in the past. There was a scoring system. If you fell below a certain score, it could come against you in relation to.
Would it be relevant to promotional prospects? So if I'm executive officer, I'm applying for an AP's job, are we going back through the PMDS and saying, well, you were satisfactory in the last 5, so, you know, that's good? Well,
it feeds into the process. Obviously, the process of promotion is very much more demanding than just PMDS.
I have no doubt. But would it form part of it in terms of the public
yes, it does,
procurement or the public appointment service?
In terms of the process, yes.
Obviously, external candidates wouldn't have had PMDS because it's predominantly in the public sector.
That's right, and that's why. Okay. And that's why it doesn't come to the interview process.
The question is therefore, and again, I fully appreciate this to be coming back in writing, the Department of the IPS Management in Longford aware that as alleged PMDS exists within prisons in name only, with scoring being picked at random, often subjectively determined by the relevant governor rather than informed by the proper processes laid down when it was introduced, with regular ongoing monitoring by assistant chiefs with regular reports, as you have outlined in that process. And I'd ask that you make the necessary inquiries into that. In relation to the mess committees, and I did make a few comments just to clarify my position versus the POA's view of my position at the beginning of the meeting. In your response of February 7th, you said that voluntary mess committees, and I'm quoting, operate as independent entities from the Irish Prison Service, end quote. I note from an email I've seen that the Director General on the 28th of January communicated to all governors and used the same sentence. I'm just wondering, how can this be, in the sense that we established that there was a lengthy IR process that led to the establishment of these, and that the staff are covered, the staff costs and the prison gratuity are covered by central funds or the prison service itself. So, I mean, if they are independent, as the IPS and indeed you asserted, that the Operations Committee is not under the control of the Irish Prison Service, would this not constitute a breach of Rule 30 and 31 of the Prison Rules of 2007 in regard to the employment of prisoners? It's also alleged to me that in excess of $2 million has been spent on mess facilities over the last number of years by the IPS.
Did you say employment of prisoners? Or prison office? What did you say there?
Employment, yeah.
Of?
Prisoners.
So they're not employees. I'll just clarify, the prison officers are employees. They might be there for training and other purposes.
I don't want to lose the point here. I don't want to lose the point here.
I know, but when you said employees, I didn't want people thinking the prisoners are employed in the prison service.
Yeah, my wording stands.
Okay.
Okay. And I'll just repeat it so that you can be clear. I said, if, as the Irish Prison Service and indeed the Department assert that the operation of the mess is not under the control of the Irish Prison Service, This perhaps would then constitute a breach of Rule 30 and 31 of the Prison Rules 2007 in regard to the employment of prisoners. So just, I hope that clarifies it. It's alleged to me that £2 million has been spent on mess facilities over the last number of years by the capital budget of the prison service directly. The IPS have contracted a private company, Cater Care of Limerick, to audit the mess facilities for environmental health purpose. The audit reports are to the IPS. The HSE environmental health officers carry out inspections of the mess facilities and report to the IPS. And the governor of each prison is ex officio a member of each mess committee. So how, therefore, can we consider them to be independent?
Deputy, I'm not proposing to answer any of these questions.
That's okay, right, that's fine.
Please, look, again, for the record, you're putting a lot of stuff on the record.
No, and that's
for the
okay,
record,
and I accept
this
that.
is not what we are here to discuss.
Absolutely. I said that myself at the beginning.
I know, yeah, but I mean, so I'm just putting it on the record again.
We're expected to answer.
And I really don't propose to. We're here to discuss the justice and equality vote.
And we've covered the ground fairly well, and we'll be finished in 10 minutes.
The last time we were here on the prisons vote, we had a large number of allegations that were put on the record.
Well, I'm going to get to them now. You said that already.
Again, Deputy, untested allegations that were put on the record.
Yes.
When detailed responses were provided, I don't think a lot of those allegations stood up, to be perfectly honest.
I would put to you, I would put to you contrary.
Through the chair.
Deputy, please now. I think I have the microphone.
Go on.
So, like again today, you're putting a large number of untested allegations on the record. That's a matter for the chairman. I'm not going to say yay or nay about that.
Yeah.
But I am not going to respond to them on the hop. It's completely inappropriate for me. It would be inappropriate for me to do that.
I fully appreciate that.
And therefore, I have no intention to do that. No. But if you wish to continue to put things on the record, that's a matter for the chair.
And it's through the chair. So, Mr. Of course, you're not here to answer those questions. And I've made it clear, if I'm concerned, which I've already stated I am, I will be sending a transcript to this to the Guard.
Which is great.
That's the outcome of this.
Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to get to some of the content of the other meeting in a moment or two. All right. So that question stands in the Mess Committee, and you come back to us, I hope. The same email that I have referred to, that I have seen, that was sent to governors on the 28th of January, said, and I'm quoting, that Mess Committee staff, quote, are advised to engage professional financial advice regarding the tax status of committees and the financial books that were to be kept, end quote. So, again, just on the independent side, this seems somewhat of a Pontius Pilate, that we seem to be taking control on an awful lot of things in terms of expenditure, light, heat and various other things. And again, let me point out again, I'm totally for the appropriate availability of food and meals and everything to prison service. But I just say it does seem like an element of a Pontius Pilate move. You know, governors, as I said, are on the committee. So I don't see the level of independence or the separation here. So there obviously are, certainly that line would suggest to me that the prison service are oblivious to the tax status, financial books or whatever. And indeed, in your answer to me, which you called so detailed, we asked for audited accounts. You sent to me a list of balances. You sent to me a list of balances from accounts, and you pointed out that the balances in the accounts may not all be profit. You didn't answer the question of who audits, when audit, or anything like that, and we're still oblivious to that. You did, however, send us the procedure, and nobody's doubting that there are procedures in place of how cash could be managed. So I would suggest to you respectfully that it is the department who have not tested some of the issues I brought up at the last meeting. Rather, you've taken people's word for it, and that may not be enough, is what I'm suggesting. So I'll ask you to note that question as well. The email also goes on to say to governors, to ask governors that, quote, if you are aware of any misuse of prison service materials, end quote. Now, you know, so the governors then in turn have to say, the difficulty here is if there were practices that were wrong, And I'm not saying governors are involved, but they could be, or we don't know. You know, we'd love to think everybody is above reproach, but these questions are arising. So governors could be aware of these practices. So what do we expect them to say, other than, sure, there's nothing to see here? So can I ask the department, would they consider asking the CNAG or an appropriate arm's-length body, for example, your own internal audit department, who, it says in the procedure, can do spot checks, but I prefer the CNAG, to carry out a forensic audit of all mess committees, going back to their establishment, including interviews with all relevant personnel. Again, you've said you're not answering it, and that's perfectly fine, and I understand why. But I'd ask you to take it on board. I'd ask, are the department or the IPS aware, and this is a serious allegation, but it has come up umpteen times, are the department or the IPS aware of an alleged amount in the region of 20 to 25,000 being taken from the tuck shop or tuck shop account in a Dublin prison to fund a trip for a group to a sporting event or sporting related event in the United States between the years 2010 to 2013? And given the existence of such allegations that I've just mentioned, would the department ask the CNAG, or as I've said earlier, or another appropriate arm's-length body to carry out a forensic audit of all tuck shops over the last 10 years, including the carrying out of interviews of all relevant personnel? You mentioned in terms of the vehicles, or you alluded to some of them.
Just come in here. I want to clarify something for the public record, for everybody watching here. And it's important to say, these are questions, and I'm being black and white on this, these are issues being raised by Deputy MacSharry, who is one member of the 13 members, until such time as the committee agrees to put these questions to you. They are not, this is not a request from the PAC. Regularly we have a situation here, people ask for information, but it has to be agreed by the committee.
Chairman, can I ask?
Just let me finish speaking. Every day here we ask questions, people ask for other information, and it's agreed by the committee to seek the information. One member asking something that the committee doesn't agree, it's a matter for the deputy to follow whatever matter they choose. But what's happening here now is there is a statement, and I'm not restricting.
So it wasn't a statement, it was a question.
I'm not restricting a person's right to speak and put questions all they like.
And I'd just like some clarity.
No, I'm giving the clarification for a minute.
Yeah, okay.
This is not a request from the Public Accounts Committee until such time as the Public Accounts Committee decides what questions to put to you. It's a request from one member, which is not the Public Accounts Committee. I'll be, as I said, probably referring it to the Garda Síochána, and it'll be a matter for the members of the committee to decide whether to formally put these questions to you when the members have had an opportunity. Because one member raises an issue here, he's speaking in as a member, but not on behalf of the committee at this point in time. So do you understand? I hope you accept.
I accept that fully, Chairman.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Accept that.
That's helpful clarification.
And I know we're in an unusual, but it's not my job to restrict a member in the Parliament from saying what a member has to say.
Absolutely.
But he's not speaking for the PAC here today. As of now, he's speaking for yourself, and it'll be up to the committee.
Yeah, can I come back? I come back to just some comments.
It'll be up to the committee whether the committee wants to put these questions to you.
I'll come back to some to comment on what you've just said, but I'm just going to finish this first, all right? Yeah. In relation to vehicles, I mentioned vehicles at the last meeting, and on your reply on February 7th, you indicated that all vehicles are accounted for, including the sentence, quote, all assets have been verified by local management as being on site, end quote. What if certain members of local management may have endorsed the absence, loan or alternative use of prison assets? So, I mean, we're taking people's word for it, you know, and fine. I mean, please God, all of these people are people of the highest integrity, you know. But an investigation is not ringing someone saying, listen, were you speeding on that road over there? No, I wasn't. Oh, right so. It seems to me, Secretary-General, there's a crisis in confidence among hard-working prison staff at all levels to call out wrongdoing in the current culture that exists. And the question is, what are we doing about it? You know, why, if there is a robust system, are people coming forward in other ways to other people in various forms in the Oireachtas committees, including this one? Is all the information coming up? in research vexatious fantasy concocted by disgruntled staff who have an axe to grind, or are some or all of these matters true? The question is, are we prepared to check? Surely prudence, as I've said already, demands that all matters are independently investigated. And I would put it to you, contrary to your own claims against me, that you have not tested the information I've put to you, but rather you've simply asked the question and accepted an answer, assuming, therefore, that that one answer to my question was correct, rather than carrying out an independent investigation in the interest of the taxpayer, health and safety and well-being of a healthy environment and culture for the prison staff themselves. Can I ask, are the Department of Justice open to my recommendation, which I'm making now, for the establishment of a GSOC-style inspectorate separate from the IPS headquarters in Longford, with statutory powers to provide prison staff with the support and protection they require, and the confidence that they are entitled to, that they are above reproach and unable to be infected by any culture that may exist among a small number of staff at various levels? The Department are only aware of what and depend on information provided by Longford as the headquarters. Longford, it would appear to me from my research, are only aware and as good as the information provided to them by individual prisons. But it would seem to me that some or all individual prisons seem to operate, when it comes to a number of issues, as islands. And I started off by saying that my research has led me to question the existence of a parallel investigative, judicial and enforcement system in operation across our prison services. So I hope that those questions will be noted and answered. I would like, Chairman, you to provide for me in writing the standing order which allows my utterances to be adjudicated upon as to their validity or worth by other members of the committee. And I look forward to getting that in writing and what Act determines that, because I have been very careful and taken legal advice and chosen my words very carefully today in not identifying anybody, in focusing on processes and procedures that are absolutely relevant to expenditure of the state and the Department of Justice. And I would question your own competence as Chair to tell the Director General that he does not have to answer and can, in effect, the implications of what you said, disregard the questions I, in trying to use this time efficiently, have put to him, which I fully accepted at the outset this morning, he could do in advance of this, or after this meeting, with the experts involved in the prison service and so on. So if I could get the written response in anticipation from you as to what that, and it doesn't have to be provided now. I thank you for staying on. I know we're missing votes as a result, but I do believe these matters are of the utmost importance, and prudence demands they require investigation and actual testing rather than the sort of testing we've seen in the past. And I thank all of the members of the panel for coming in today, and continue to wish the Director General every good wish in his new role, and hope that he will take where I'm coming from in the spirit with which it is intended, which is only to protect taxpayer and ordinary prison officers in their place of work. Thanks.
Thank you. So, as Chairman, I do want to reiterate my position as chairing the meeting. I say, as Chairman, I respect the right of all members to speak openly and freely in the public accounts, as people are entitled to do in the Chamber. The Deputy has made it very clear that he had questions to put. He had made his own investigations and his own inquiries. No member of the committee is aware of any of the documentation or research that you've carried out, and I accept what you said, it's your own research. Here at the committee meetings every week we agree a set of minutes, and we also have a list of agreed follow-up items by the committee that the committee follows up, not 13 individual people going in 13 different directions. We operate here as a committee, not as 13 unconnected people. So everything we do is done by the committee, or if it's not done by the committee, it's effectively not done
full stop, by the PAC. So what I'm saying is that the questions that have been raised today, until such time as the committee agrees to put those questions to you, I want to thank you. You were here to listen and to note what was being said, but you're not, the committee has not requested you to respond to any of those items. And if the committee so chooses to send the transcript and endorse all the questions that have been put, and the committee decides to put the questions to you, that will be considered by the committee. But until such time as the committee, or the Public Accounts Committee, makes that decision, you have the request from the committee as we speak. Members here, 13 different members make 13 different types of comments every week.
There are 12 adjudicate on everybody else's questions.
If you'll have noticed during the questioning today, even today and every other day, sometimes a member comes in with a question, and I regularly come in, I all the time, every meeting come in and say, you're to respond to the committee. I actually have said that several times today. Several times today. I say it every week, such that a person goes out, was that a request or was it a remark? So I make it clear at every meeting here, when I come in and say, you respond to the committee, clarify that to the committee, and that comes from the committee, not from me.
The last person I want to be in conflict with is the chair.
There is no conflict at all.
What can I say is, while the chairman has said what he said, I've put the questions, they're a matter of public record. I'd ask that you would answer for them, irrespective of what the chair said. That said, however, if you require them all in writing, in duplicate, to double the process, as parliamentary questions, you'll have them in 24 hours. But you could circumvent the process by taking on board what I've asked in the public interest. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So at this stage now, I think people understand the status of where we're at here today, and it's a matter for the committee. So at this stage now, I want to thank Mr O'Driscoll and the officials from the Department of Justice and Equality, and also from Mr Burke from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform and the CNAG staff for their presence here today. It's agreed that the clerk will follow up any agreed follow-up information approved by the committee in advance of our next meeting. We now stand adjourned until the 11th of April 2019, when we will be meeting with the Central Statistics Office and the Office of the Controller and Auditor General for his, which I don't think has ever happened before to my recollection, in relation to... Pardon?
21 years ago.
21 years ago. Who was the chairman on that occasion?
Oh, I'll find out for you.
We better look up that. So anyway, 21 years that happened. And that's in relation to the appropriation accounts, vote number 4 for the CSO and vote 8 for the Office of the Controller and Auditor General. And the committee has also agreed to the request from Professor Chris Fitzpatrick, who is a consultant obstetrician and gynaecologist at the Coombe Women's and Infants University Hospital and was Master of the Coombe from 2006 to 2012 in connection with the National Children's Hospital. The meeting is now adjourned.